Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Relaxing. Tonight we step into a towering medieval castle in the winter of 1215, where every stone beneath your boots feels colder than the last. Every breath rises like pale smoke into the dark air, and every doorway promises shelter that is only slightly less freezing than the world outside. You are about to discover that castles look wonderfully impressive from a distance. But living inside one during the coldest winter is a completely different adventure. In fact, you probably will not survive this if you arrive expecting roaring fireplaces in every room and cozy feather beds waiting just for you. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, let me know where you are listening from and what your local time is right now. Now, dim the lights and let the heavy wooden gate slowly open as you leave the modern world behind. You stand on a narrow road glazed with frozen mud. Snow lies in uneven patches across the fields, blown into ridges by sharp winter winds. The countryside seems almost silent, except for the distant call of crows circling above bare trees. Your fingers already ache from the cold, and you have not even reached the castle yet. Ahead of you rises a fortress of grey stone. Its walls seem to grow directly out of the frozen earth, stubborn and immovable. Tall towers overlook the landscape with small windows that resemble watchful eyes. Smoke curls from a handful of chimneys, disappearing into a pale sky that promises little warmth from a distance. The castle appears comforting. Surely all that stone must keep people warm. You quickly discover that stone has no interest in your comfort. As you climb toward the gatehouse, the wind gathers speed. It slips beneath your hood and crawls down your neck with surprising determination. You pull your cloak tighter, but the fabric is already damp from drifting snow. Wool helps, but only so much. A pair of guards watches your approach from above. Their cloaks flap loudly in the wind. One stamps his boots against the wooden platform, trying to restore feeling to his toes. Standing still during a medieval winter is almost as exhausting as hard work. The great gate creaks open just enough to admit travellers one at a time. You step beneath the gatehouse. The thick oak doors are reinforced with iron bands. Above your head hangs the heavy portcullis, ready to crash down if danger appears. This defensive entrance is one of the strongest parts of a medieval castle. Historians generally agree that gatehouses became increasingly sophisticated during the High Middle Ages because they were considered the castle's greatest weak point. You glance upward and wonder whether anyone ever accidentally dropped that enormous iron grille. Thankfully, not today. Inside, the sounds change immediately. The howling wind fades into echoes. Boots scrape across frozen stone. Horses snort clouds of steam into the air. Somewhere nearby, a blacksmith's hammer rings steadily, each strike carrying through the courtyard. The smell surprises you first. You expected clean snow. Instead, winter has trapped every scent inside the walls. Wood smoke hangs thick in the air. Horses fill the stables with their familiar earthy smell. Wet straw, damp wool, cooking broth, burning tallow candles, and countless people living close together create an aroma that no expensive modern air freshener has ever attempted to imitate. Oddly enough, after a few minutes, you begin to stop noticing it. People move quickly through the courtyard because lingering outside is unpleasant. Servants carry baskets of firewood stacked almost higher than their heads. A boy struggles to drag a small sled loaded with sacks of grain across packed snow. Two women hurry toward the kitchens with pails that slosh gently as they walk. Nobody wastes unnecessary movement. Winter has a way of turning even simple errands into difficult work. The castle itself feels alive, not lively exactly. Alive in the sense that hundreds of people depend upon each other every single day. Nobles, servants, soldiers, cooks, priests, craftsmen, stable workers, children, and visitors all share these walls. Some sleep in private chambers, others curl up beside kitchens or storehouses wherever a little warmth can be found. Your own feet are already beginning to lose feeling. You glance toward the great hall. Surely that must be warmer. You push open another heavy wooden door. A wave of warmer air greets you, although warm is perhaps being generous. Compared to the freezing courtyard, it feels almost luxurious. Compared to a modern heated house, it resembles standing beside an open refrigerator. A massive fireplace burns at one end of the hall. Flames dance across thick logs, throwing orange light onto timber beams blackened by decades of smoke. The fire is impressive, but the room itself is enormous. Heat struggles to fill such a vast space. The closer you stand to the hearth, the happier you become. Take 3 steps away. Winter immediately reminds you who is in charge. Rushes cover parts of the floor. Long wooden tables line the hall. Benches wait for meals that will arrive later. Above, banners hang quietly, their colours softened by years of soot. Some scholars suggest that decorative tapestries serve not only to display wealth, but also to reduce drafts from cold stone walls. Historians still argue whether their insulating effect was significant, or mostly a pleasant side benefit of expensive decoration. Either way, standing beside cloth instead of bare stone certainly feels less bleak. A servant tosses another log onto the fire. Everyone nearby instinctively shifts a little closer. Heat is valuable. Nobody says this aloud because nobody needs to. You notice people rubbing their hands together often. Others warm their palms before quickly returning to work. A young page carefully turns a spit over the flames while trying not to singe his sleeves. Life never pauses simply because the weather becomes miserable. Outside, frost continues creeping across the castle walls. Inside, routine continues. One curious tale from medieval Europe claims that some households believed certain carved faces placed above doorways helped keep malicious winter spirits away from the family. Whether anyone truly believes such carvings possessed magical power remains uncertain. But stories like these reveal how deeply long winters shaped people's imagination. You cannot help smiling at the thought. If a carved wooden face could also stop cold drafts, every castle would probably have hundreds of them. The afternoon light fades surprisingly early. Winter afternoons are brief companions. Candles begin appearing throughout the hall. Their small flames flicker gently whenever someone opens a door. Shadows stretch across the floor, making the room seem even larger than before. Beyond the windows, snow begins falling once more, soft at first, then steadily. Every snowflake quietly reminds the castle's inhabitants that spring remains very far away. No one greets the snowfall with excitement. Beautiful as it may be, fresh snow means harder travel, greater effort gathering supplies, and another layer of icy silence settling over the countryside. You realise something important. This castle is not merely a home, it is a machine built for survival. Every beam, every hearth, every storeroom, every servant, every bundle of firewood contributes to keeping hundreds of lives going through the harshest months of the year. And now, as darkness settles outside and the fire crackles patiently before you, you begin to understand that surviving a medieval winter is not about comfort, it is about endurance. Tomorrow morning, before dawn has fully broken over these frozen walls, you will discover just how much work is required simply to begin another cold day. The fire is still glowing behind you as you leave the great hall, but its warmth fades with surprising speed. Only a few steps into the castle's winding passages and the chill returns, as though it has been patiently waiting around every corner. You pull your cloak tighter and breathe slowly. Your breath appears in pale clouds that drift upward before disappearing into the dim light. The corridors seem endless. Stone walls rise on either side, rough beneath your fingertips. They are cool enough that you instinctively pull your hand away after only a moment. These walls have absorbed months of winter weather. They do not easily surrender their cold. The castle feels less like a single building and more like a collection of connected worlds. Narrow staircases twist upward inside towers. Dark passageways lead towards storerooms, sleeping chambers, workshops, and guard posts. Every turn reveals another heavy oak door or another flight of uneven steps worn smooth by generations of boots. You quickly discover that castles were not designed with comfort as their highest priority. Defense comes first. Everything else comes after. The windows are your next surprise. From outside they look tiny. From inside they seem even smaller. Many are little more than narrow openings cut through thick walls. Some have simple wooden shutters. Others are covered with oiled cloth or pieces of horn that allow a little light inside while keeping out part of the weather. Glass exists in 1215, but it remains costly and is reserved for only a handful of important places in the wealthiest castles. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked today is that most medieval castles had very little glass compared with later centuries. Even noble families accepted darker interiors because large windows weakened defences and allowed precious warmth to escape. You stand beside one opening and carefully push back a shutter. The wind answers immediately. It whistles through the gap with astonishing force. Snowflakes tumble inside and melt upon the stone floor. You close the shutter again with no hesitation. Mystery solved. Tiny windows suddenly seem like an excellent idea, even with the shutters closed. The castle never becomes completely still. The wind finds astonishingly creative ways to enter. It slips beneath doors, through cracks between stones, around window frames, and down chimneys. You begin to think of the cold as an invisible guest who refuses every polite hint that it should leave. A servant carrying folded blankets walks past without complaint. She has likely lived with these drafts her entire life. You, meanwhile, are already dreaming about central heating. The staircase ahead curls upward inside a round tower. The steps are narrow and uneven. You climb carefully, placing each foot with caution. A stumble here would result in an embarrassing journey. Back down much faster than intended. At the top, you emerge into a chamber overlooking the countryside. The view is magnificent. White fields stretch toward distant forests. A frozen stream glitters beneath the weak winter sun. Smoke rises from scattered villages where ordinary families face the same bitter season without towering stone walls to protect them. Yet something becomes obvious. Those villagers may actually have warmer homes. Their cottages are smaller. Their fires heat compact rooms far more efficiently than the vast spaces inside this fortress. Large castles impress visitors. Small houses keep people warmer. Life has a sense of humour sometimes. A guard stands watch beside the window slit. His cheeks are red from the cold. His beard carries tiny crystals of frost. Every few minutes he stamps his feet against the floor to keep blood flowing. Watch duty in winter demands patience. You ask yourself how many hours you could stand here before begging someone else to take over. Probably fewer than you would like to admit. Below, activity continues despite the weather. Workers carry barrels across the courtyard. Stable boys brush snow from horses. A cart struggles through the gate carrying another load of firewood. Nothing can wait until spring. The castle consumes supplies every single day. As you descend once more, your footsteps echo through the tower. The sound lingers long after each step, bouncing softly between stone walls. Castles possess their own quiet music. Boots, distant voices, crackling fires, barking dogs, clanging tools, and the occasional raven outside combine into a constant background that becomes strangely comforting. You pass a chamber where several servants are hanging thick woolen cloth along one interior wall. These are expensive textiles. Bright colours still survive despite years of smoke and use. Scenes of hunting, forests, and mythical creatures decorate the fabric, besides displaying wealth. Such hangings make the room feel noticeably less severe. They soften echoes. They reduce the sensation of sitting beside frozen stone. They even create tiny pockets of trapped air that offer modest insulation. Whether this made rooms dramatically warmer remains uncertain. Researchers continue debating how much practical benefit these heavy fabrics provided compared with their symbolic value. Even if the difference was small, every little improvement mattered during long winters. Nearby stands an impressive wooden bed. It is far higher than you expected. Climbing into it almost requires determination. The mattress rests upon ropes stretched tightly across the frame. Thick blankets lie folded on top alongside fur coverings reserved for wealthier occupants. You glance beneath the bed. Nothing. Modern monsters appear to have skipped medieval castles, although perhaps the rat simply chose somewhere warmer. Beds often have curtains surrounding them. At first glance they seem decorative. Then you step inside. The enclosed space feels noticeably less drafty, not warm exactly, just less eager to steal your body heat. It is a clever solution. Instead of heating an enormous chamber, you create a smaller pocket where warmth from your own body remains trapped through the night. You silently thank whichever medieval carpenter first thought of this idea. As afternoon drifts toward evening once again, candles flicker in iron holders attached to the walls. Their light dances across rough stone, creating shadows that shift gently with every passing draft. You begin noticing something curious. People rarely complain aloud about the cold. They acknowledge it, certainly. They adapt to it constantly. But endless complaints would accomplish nothing. Winter is simply another fact of life, much like sunrise, or taxes, or that one rooster who insists dawn begins far earlier than everyone else believes. One unusual medieval belief claimed that particularly loud winter winds carried whispers from wandering spirits searching for shelter. Children were sometimes warned not to answer mysterious voices heard outside after dark. Whether anyone genuinely believed such tales is difficult to know, but stories like these helped explain frightening sounds that echoed around castles during long winter nights. You pause near another narrow window. The wind hums softly through tiny cracks. For one brief moment, you almost understand why such legends endured. Darkness arrives quickly. Servants move through the passages lighting additional candles before disappearing into other rooms. Doors close one after another with heavy wooden thuds somewhere below. The smell of fresh bread mingles with wood smoke. Your stomach reminds you that the evening meal cannot be too far away. Yet before food comes another realization. This castle survives because every room serves a purpose. Nothing exists simply because it looks attractive. Walls defend, stairs connect, shutters protect, curtains preserve warmth. Every design choice reflects generations of experience learned through winters much like this one. You continue deeper into the fortress, following the faint scent of smoke that promises another hearth somewhere ahead. There, among glowing embers and stacks of carefully cut logs, you will soon discover that creating warmth inside a medieval castle is almost as demanding as defending it. The smell of burning oak grows stronger with every step you take. It drifts through the passageways in slow waves, mixing with smoke, damp wool, and the faint scent of cooked onions lingering from the kitchens. After wandering through rooms where the cold seemed determined to follow you everywhere, the promise of another fire feels almost magical. Almost. You round a corner and find a servant kneeling before a large hearth. He is carefully arranging thick logs with a long iron poker. Sparks leap upward as he nudges glowing embers together. A few bright flecks dance into the air before fading into darkness. You instinctively move closer, so does everyone else. The fire has become the most popular gathering place in the room without anyone needing to announce it. Warmth is a valuable resource inside this castle. It is shared, it is protected, and it is never taken for granted. You stretch your hands toward the flames. At first your fingers sting as feeling slowly returns. The warmth does not spread evenly. Your hands grow comfortable while your back remains chilly. Turn around, and the opposite happens. Keeping your entire body warm is a constant negotiation. No one wins completely. The hearth itself is enormous, far larger than a modern fireplace. Thick stone surrounds the opening, blackened by decades of soot. Above, the chimney rises through the castle, carrying away much of the smoke, much of it, not all. Thin ribbons of grey continue to drift into the room. Your eyes water slightly. You cough once, then again. No one else seems particularly bothered. They have lived with smoky air for years. You're still getting acquainted. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval fireplaces often produced plenty of indoor smoke, especially before improvements in chimney construction became widespread. Even castles with well-built hearths remained smoky by modern standards. Your eyes eventually adjust, your lungs probably have opinions. Nearby, another servant arrives carrying an armload of split logs. Each piece has already been carefully cut and stacked outside before being brought indoors. Nothing about this process is casual. Firewood represents survival. Every log has been gathered, hauled, chopped, dried, stored, and finally carried here by someone's hard work. You suddenly understand why nobody casually tosses extra wood onto the flames. Every stick matters. Outside the castle walls, teams of workers continue bringing in more fuel whenever weather allows. Forests provide much of the wood, but gathering it is no simple errand. Imagine trudging through frozen woodland before sunrise. Imagine swinging an axe while wearing damp gloves. Imagine dragging heavy branches across icy ground. Now repeat that day after day. Winter has a remarkable ability to transform ordinary chores into exhausting achievements. You follow one of the wood carriers through the courtyard. Snow crunches beneath your boots. A biting wind immediately reminds you why everyone appreciates indoor fires so deeply. Near one wall stands an impressive stack of firewood, covered with simple shelters to keep snow from soaking into the timber. Workers sort different sizes into neat piles. Small pieces help start fires. Larger logs keep them burning through long evenings. Nothing is left to chance. A steward oversees the supplies with careful attention. His responsibility includes making sure enough fuel lasts until warmer weather returns. Running out would be disastrous. The castle cannot simply place an order online and expect next-day delivery. Nature remains the only supplier. As you watch, two boys collect fallen twigs from around the yard. Even these tiny pieces have value. They fill baskets that will later help ignite fresh fires throughout the household. Waste almost disappears during winter. Everything useful finds a purpose. You return indoors before your nose completely loses feeling. The contrast between outside and inside is striking. The room is still cool by modern expectations, yet after only a few minutes outdoors it feels wonderfully welcoming. Perspective changes quickly. You notice that not every chamber enjoys its own fireplace. Some rooms remain distinctly colder than others. People naturally gather where heat exists. Servants pause briefly beside hearths before continuing their duties. Guards rotate watch shifts so frozen hands can recover. Children drift toward warm corners whenever adults are distracted. Even the castle dogs seem to have mastered this strategy. Several large hounds lie stretched near glowing embers, occasionally opening one eye to inspect passing feet before deciding that sleeping remains the wiser choice. Honestly, they may be the smartest residents here. A cook appears carrying an iron pot suspended from a sturdy hook. She carefully lowers it above the flames, adjusting its height until the contents simmer gently. Cooking and heating happen together. The fire serves several purposes at once. It warms people, it prepares meals, it heats water, it dries damp clothing hung nearby. Every flame earns its place. You notice shirts and stockings hanging from wooden poles close to the hearth. Not too close. Everyone understands that wool dries nicely. Wool also burns rather enthusiastically if given the opportunity. One distracted moment could destroy valuable clothing. A young page nearly learns this lesson firsthand. His sleeve drifts too near the fire while he reaches for another log. An older servant gently pulls him back before anything disastrous happens. The boy blushes. Everyone pretends not to notice. Lessons learned quietly tend to be remembered longest. An unusual story circulates among some medieval communities about mysterious household spirits that supposedly rewarded families who respected the hearth and punished those who neglected it. Leaving the fire untended or behaving carelessly near it was said to invite bad luck. Whether these tales reflected genuine belief or simply encouraged careful behaviour remains impossible to know. Still, considering how dangerous uncontrolled fire could become inside a timber-roofed building, perhaps a few spooky stories were useful. You certainly become more respectful of open flames after watching sparks leap onto the stone floor. Fortunately, they die almost immediately. As evening deepens, another responsibility begins, keeping fires alive through the night. Not every hearth burns continuously. Fuel must be rationed. Important rooms receive larger fires. Less important spaces cool considerably after dark. Someone always remains responsible for checking embers, adding wood when necessary, and ensuring flames never spread beyond their proper place. Sleep comes only after duty. Historians continue discussing exactly how fuel was allocated within different castles, because surviving records vary widely. Wealthy households appear able to burn generous amounts of wood, while smaller fortifications likely practice stricter conservation. Either way, no one treated fire casually. You sit quietly beside the hearth for a few peaceful moments. The crackling becomes almost hypnotic. Logs shift with soft popping sounds. Orange light flickers across rough stone walls. Outside, the wind scratches faintly against wooden shutters. For the first time since arriving, you feel something close to comfort. Not luxury, not complete warmth. Simply enough heat to let your shoulders relax. You realize that people living here probably measured winter differently than you do. Instead of asking whether today felt cold, they asked whether there was enough wood, enough embers, enough hands to keep every fire burning, enough fuel to reach spring. That practical way of thinking shapes every decision inside these walls. As another servant quietly places fresh logs upon the glowing coals, the room brightens once more. Tomorrow will begin before sunrise. The fires will need tending again. The wood piles will grow smaller. The cold will return with stubborn determination. And before anyone can enjoy even a mouthful of breakfast, the castle household will already be awake, dressing in darkness and preparing to face another frozen day. The last glow of the hearth fades behind your eyelids long before you feel truly rested. Sleep inside a medieval castle arrives in short stretches, interrupted by unfamiliar sounds, shifting temperatures, and the occasional gust of wind that somehow finds its way into your sleeping space despite every curtain and shutter. Then comes the bell. A low, steady note rolls through the castle before dawn. It is not loud enough to startle you, yet impossible to ignore. The household begins to stir almost at once, somewhere beyond your chamber. Footsteps echo across stone floors, doors creak open. Someone coughs. Another person mutters a sleepy prayer. The day has begun. You open your eyes to darkness, not the deep darkness of midnight, but the blue-grey dimness that arrives just before sunrise. The small window admits almost no light. Frost has gathered along its edges during the night, tracing delicate patterns that resemble tiny branches or feathers. For a brief moment you consider staying beneath the blankets. It is an appealing idea. Unfortunately, medieval life has very little interest in appealing ideas. The air outside the bed curtains bites at your face the instant you climb out. Your feet touch the floor, and the stone greets you with a level of cold that feels almost personal. You quickly understand why many people sleep wearing part of their clothing during winter. Getting dressed is not a leisurely ritual. It is an urgent mission. A servant has already revived the small fire in this chamber, but it is still gathering strength. The first flames lick cautiously at the dry kindling before reaching thicker pieces of wood. The room will not become noticeably warmer for some time. You begin with the linen shirt. The fabric feels cool against your skin. Then comes a wool tunic, followed by another thicker layer. A hood rests around your shoulders. Thick stockings disappear beneath sturdy shoes that never seem entirely dry at this time of year. One detail that appears again and again in surviving household records is the importance of wool. It was the dependable fabric of medieval northern Europe, valued because it continued to provide warmth even when damp. Linen served well next to the skin, but wool carried much of the burden once winter settled across the landscape. You silently thank every sheep that has ever existed. Without them, mornings like this would feel considerably longer. As you finish fastening your belt, another servant enters carrying a small candle. Its soft light transforms the chamber. Shadows retreat just enough for furniture to emerge from the darkness. The carved bedposts become visible. A wooden chest rests against one wall. A stool waits beside the hearth. Simple objects, essential objects. Nothing here exists purely for decoration. Outside, the corridor grows busier, pages hurry past carrying messages. Kitchen workers make their way downstairs before anyone else has fully awakened. Stable hands are already outside despite the frozen air. The horses cannot feed themselves, neither can the chickens, nor the dogs, nor the hundreds of people living within these walls. A castle wakes like a living creature, one part after another. You step into the passage. Cold air brushes your face immediately. The castle is quieter than it will be later, yet never silent. Somewhere below, a bucket scrapes across stone. From another room comes the rhythmic sound of someone splitting kindling. A faint smell of fresh bread begins drifting upward from the kitchens, mixing with wood smoke that has already become strangely familiar. Your stomach notices before the rest of you does. Breakfast remains some time away. Work comes first. You follow a narrow staircase downward toward the chapel. Many members of the household begin the day with prayer. Religion forms a steady rhythm throughout medieval life, shaping not only great ceremonies but also ordinary mornings like this one. Candles flicker gently inside the small chapel. Their light reflects from polished metal and carved wood. People kneel quietly, some wrapped tightly in cloaks against the lingering chill. A priest speaks in Latin. You recognize very little of the language, yet the calm cadence fills the room with quiet purpose. For many people here, this moment offers a sense of order before the demands of the day begin. Outside, the weather cannot be controlled, harvest cannot be guaranteed, illness arrives without invitation, prayer becomes one way of facing uncertainty. Exactly how deeply every individual believed these rituals is something that continues to invite discussion among medieval specialists. Personal faith leaves few written footprints, making certainty difficult centuries later. The service ends. The household immediately returns to motion. No lingering, no slow conversations. Tasks await as daylight slowly strengthens. You cross the courtyard once again. The snow crunches beneath every step. The sky has cleared overnight, revealing pale winter sunshine that offers more beauty than warmth. Frost sparkles across rooftops. Icicles hang beneath gutters like rows of crystal knives. A stable boy carries 2 heavy buckets of water. Well, partially frozen water. He pauses halfway across the yard to catch his breath before continuing. Nearby, another worker chips ice from the edge of a trough so the horses can drink. Nothing about this season is effortless. Even water demands labour. A group of guards changes shifts atop the walls. Those finishing their watch descend stiffly, rubbing their hands together as they make their way toward the nearest fire. The new watch climbs upward with resigned determination. Duty ignores the weather. The wind certainly does not grant holidays. An old tale from several parts of medieval Europe claimed that the first raven seen after sunrise could reveal the fortune of the coming day. A bird flying toward the castle promised good news. One flying away supposedly warned of difficult hours ahead. Whether anyone truly organized their plans around ravens is another matter entirely. Still, as one dark bird glides across the pale sky, you cannot help following it with your eyes. Perhaps stories become more comforting during long winters. Perhaps people simply enjoy believing the world occasionally leaves small clues. You continue toward one of the workshops tucked against the inner wall, inside. Craftsmen have already begun their work. A cooper checks wooden barrels for cracks. A carpenter smooths rough boards with careful strokes. An apprentice sweeps wood shavings into neat piles. Hands remain busy because idle hands grow cold remarkably quickly. Movement creates warmth almost as effectively as fire. You notice that nobody rushes without reason. Their pace is steady, measured, efficient. Years of routine have taught them exactly how much effort each task requires. You, meanwhile, are still trying to wake up completely. The smell of baking bread grows stronger. So does another scent. Porridge, not glamorous, not exciting, but wonderfully reassuring after a freezing morning. Your thoughts drift toward breakfast with increasing enthusiasm. The great hall is beginning to fill once more. Long tables stand ready. Servants arrange wooden bowls, mugs, and baskets with practiced precision. Fresh logs crackle in the great hearth, casting warm light across faces that looked pale only minutes ago. The castle has completed another successful beginning. Everyone rose before dawn. The fire survived the night. The animals have been fed. Morning prayers have ended. Work is already well underway. Only now does the household finally gather for its first simple meal of the day. You take your place among the growing crowd, grateful for the warmth of the hall, the smell of fresh bread, and the comforting promise that breakfast, however modest, is finally within reach. You settle onto a sturdy wooden bench while the last traces of morning chill cling stubbornly to your clothes. The fire at the far end of the hall throws a warm glow across the room, but it does not quite reach where you are sitting. That seems to be the story of castle life. Warmth is always nearby, yet rarely quite enough. As breakfast disappears and people return to their duties, you realize another battle begins almost immediately. The battle against the cold itself. Food helps. Fire helps. But clothing is what stays with you all day. You glance around the hall. No one is dressed lightly. Layer upon layer surrounds every person. Cloaks drape over shoulders, hoods cover heads, thick belts secure heavy garments against the wind, even indoors. Very few people remove their outer layers for long. You soon understand why. The castle may protect you from snowstorms and raiders, but it does little to stop winter from slipping through every crack. A maid passes carrying folded garments stacked nearly to her chin. Behind her walks a young page balancing a basket filled with freshly mended stockings. Nothing is wasted here. A torn sleeve is repaired, a loose button is replaced, a frayed cloak is patched rather than discarded. Textiles require far too much work to make for anyone to throw them away carelessly. Evidence from surviving medieval wardrobes and account books shows that clothing represented one of the most valuable possessions many people owned. A well-made wool cloak might serve its owner for years, receiving repair after repair until scarcely any original fabric remained visible. You cannot help admiring that practicality. Modern fashion changes every season. Here, durability wins every contest. A tailor sits near one of the brighter windows where daylight is strongest. His fingers move with remarkable speed despite the cool air. Needle, thread, fold, stitch, again, again, again. His concentration never breaks. Nearby, two women inspect a heavy cloak lined with fur. The lining feels wonderfully soft beneath your fingertips when they briefly allow you to touch it. For a fleeting second you imagine wrapping yourself inside it and refusing to leave the fire until spring arrives. An understandable fantasy. Sadly, the cloak belongs to someone much wealthier than you. Fur occupies an interesting place within castle life. Squirrel, rabbit, lamb, fox, and other animal pelts appear in garments according to status, wealth, and local availability. The richest nobles enjoy the finest linings, while ordinary servants rely mainly on sturdy wool. Warmth follows rank more often than fairness. That is simply how this world works. You're shown the different layers people wear. Closest to the skin rests linen. Its job is comfort and cleanliness. Above it comes wool in various thicknesses depending upon the season. Finally, cloaks, mantles, or heavier outer garments shield the body from wind whenever someone ventures outdoors. It sounds straightforward. Putting everything on each morning is another matter. Ties need fastening. Belts require adjusting. Hoods must sit correctly. gloves disappear at the exact moment you need them. Some things apparently never change across the centuries. You watch an elderly servant searching everywhere for a missing mitten before eventually discovering it tucked beneath his own belt. He laughs quietly to himself. Several nearby servants smile. Winter has a habit of hiding small objects. Footwear presents another challenge altogether. A rack beside the entrance holds boots in various stages of drying. Leather shoes have survived another journey across frozen ground and now sit close enough to the hearth to dry gradually without becoming damaged. Some are stuffed with straw. Others have fresh insoles waiting nearby. Keeping feet dry proves almost as important as keeping them warm. You slip your own foot into one freshly dried boot. For approximately 5 glorious seconds it feels wonderfully comfortable. Then you step outside. Snow immediately reminds you that comfort has strict limits. The courtyard sparkles beneath bright winter sunlight. Beautiful, silent, exceptionally cold. A sharp breeze pushes against your cloak, testing every fold and fastening. You instinctively pull your hood lower across your forehead. Several guards crossing the yard wear thick wool caps beneath their helmets. An elegant solution. Metal and freezing temperatures are not natural companions. Your hand brushes against the castle wall. It feels colder than before. Perhaps it always did. Perhaps your fingers simply know better now. Near the gatehouse. A group of women shake snow from heavy cloaks before hanging them inside a covered passage. One woman carefully beats frozen mud from the hem with a wooden stick. Another begins sewing a fresh patch over worn fabric. The work never truly ends. An intriguing custom recorded in parts of medieval Europe involved placing fragrant herbs such as lavender or rosemary inside clothing chests whenever they were available. People appreciated the pleasant scent, but many also believed these herbs discouraged insects from settling among stored garments. Whether they worked particularly well depends on whom you ask. The herbs certainly smelled better than damp wool after several weeks of winter. You wander toward the laundry area expecting clouds of steaming water. Instead, you find determination. Washing clothes during winter requires remarkable planning. Water freezes quickly. Drying takes much longer. Heavy garments cannot simply be scrubbed every few days. Most outer wool is brushed clean instead. Mud dries. Dirt is beaten away. Loose threads are trimmed. True washing happens less often than modern habits might expect. Researchers continue discussing exactly how frequently different social groups wash their clothing, because written evidence varies from one household to another. Wealth, climate, and local customs all influence daily routines. One thing seems certain. Laundry day demanded patience. As you continue walking, you notice children bundled into miniature versions of adult clothing. Tiny hoods, tiny cloaks, tiny mittens attached with cords so they are less likely to disappear forever. Even then, one little boy manages to lose a glove before reaching the next doorway. His mother retrieves it with the expression of someone who has solved this exact problem many times before. Some experiences belong to every century, inside another chamber. A noblewoman examines bolts of imported cloth, deep green, rich crimson, soft blue. The colours remain vibrant despite the grey winter outside. Fabric serves more than practical needs. It communicates status, taste, wealth, connections to distant markets. Every carefully chosen garment quietly tells others where its owner belongs within society. You pause before a polished bronze mirror. Well, polished enough. Your reflection appears slightly blurred, as though winter itself has softened the edges. The hood frames your face. The cloak hangs heavily from your shoulders. You almost resemble someone who belongs here. Almost. Then you instinctively reach for a zipper that does not exist. The illusion fades rather quickly. The afternoon grows colder. Clouds begin gathering once again over the surrounding countryside. Servants hurry to collect garments left airing outdoors before fresh snow arrives. Doors open and close with increasing frequency. Each time they do, another wave of icy air sweeps briefly through the passages. No one complains. They simply fasten their cloaks one notch tighter. You realize clothing inside this castle is far more than decoration. It is shelter you carry upon your own shoulders. Every stitch, every patch, every carefully mended seam helps another person endure one more freezing day. Soon the smell of simmering broth and fresh bread begins drifting once more through the corridors. The kitchens are already preparing the next meal. You follow the inviting scent through winding passages, wondering how such enormous quantities of food are prepared for an entire castle, while the fires burn from dawn until long after darkness has returned. The rich scent of simmering broth grows stronger with every step you take. It wraps itself around the colder smells of damp stone and wood smoke until your stomach quietly reminds you that breakfast was many hours ago. Somewhere ahead, dozens of people are preparing the midday meal, and judging by the aroma alone, they have been busy since before sunrise. You pass through a thick wooden doorway and enter the great hall once again. It already looks different from the quiet room you left earlier. Long tables have been wiped clean. Wooden trenchers are stacked in careful piles. Clay jugs wait beside baskets filled with dark, crusty bread. Servants move quickly but without panic, each person knowing exactly where to stand and what to carry. Nothing about this scene feels accidental. Every meal inside a castle follows a rhythm that has been repeated countless times. A steward walks slowly through the hall, checking everything with a practiced eye. He straightens a bench that sits slightly crooked. He nods toward a servant carrying cups. Another servant receives quiet instructions before disappearing toward the kitchens. No one raises their voice. There is no need. Routine does much of the talking. One well-established detail from medieval household accounts is that the Great Hall served as the social heart of many castles. Meals, meetings, celebrations, announcements, and even legal matters often took place here. It was far more than simply a dining room. You find yourself appreciating the design. The high ceiling allows smoke to drift upward before escaping through vents and chimneys. Heavy beams stretch across the roof, darkened by generations of fires. Colourful banners hang from the walls, softening the otherwise severe stone. Sunlight slips through narrow windows, creating bright patches across the floor. Dust dances lazily through those beams of light. It is strangely peaceful. At the far end of the hall stands the high table. It occupies a slightly raised platform. Nothing extravagant, just enough to remind everyone where authority sits. The Lord, members of the household, honoured guests, and important officials eat there. Everyone else fills the long rows below according to rank and responsibility. Even lunch has a seating chart. You glance around. There appears to be very little chance of accidentally taking the wrong place. If you did, someone would probably correct you with impressive speed. The first food arrives. Large baskets of bread make their way along the tables. The loaves are dense and hearty, their crusts dark from the oven. You tear away a piece while it is still warm. It requires real effort. This is bread that expects commitment. Soft supermarket slices belong many centuries in the future. Nearby, wooden bowls are filled with thick pottage. The mixture changes throughout the year depending on what is available, but today it contains barley, onions, peas, and bits of salted meat that have been simmering together for hours. Steam curls gently upward. You lift the bowl. The warmth spreads into your cold hands before the first spoonful even reaches your mouth. It is simple food, comforting food. Exactly what you hope to find during a bitter winter. Castle kitchens relied heavily on pottage because it stretched ingredients efficiently while providing filling meals for large households. Nearly every person, regardless of status, would have recognized some version of it. Although wealthier tables enjoyed richer ingredients, you take another spoonful. Perhaps simplicity deserves more credit. A servant walks past carrying a tray of roasted fish. Another follows with hard cheese. Soon afterward comes a dish of preserved apples cooked gently with spices. Every item has survived the winter through careful planning. Nothing appears by accident. Months earlier, someone salted meat, someone dried herbs, someone filled barrels with grain, someone stored apples in cool cellars. Winter meals begin in summer. You notice that everyone eats with purpose. Conversation exists, but it rarely overwhelms the room. Many people still have work waiting outside these walls. Lunch is a pause, not a holiday. Across the table sits an elderly soldier. His beard has turned almost completely white, though whether from age or frost remains difficult to judge. He tears bread into his bowl before speaking quietly with another guard about repairs needed along one section of the wall. Even meals become opportunities to solve problems. You imagine trying to discuss building maintenance over a modern office lunch. Actually, perhaps that has not changed very much either. A young page hurries through the hall carrying fresh jugs of ale. Water could sometimes be unreliable depending on its source. While weak ale was a common everyday drink because the brewing process made it safer in many situations, it contained far less alcohol than many people imagine today and formed a regular part of daily meals. You take a careful sip. It tastes earthy and slightly sour. Not unpleasant, just unfamiliar. You quietly miss cold, sparkling water. An amusing belief recorded in a few medieval writings suggested that eating too quickly might upset the body's natural balance during winter, because digestion was thought to work differently in cold weather. Whether many ordinary people paid attention to such advice is impossible to say, but it shows how closely medicine and everyday life were connected. Looking round the hall, at least one hungry teenager appears completely unconvinced by that theory. His bowl empties with astonishing speed. A woman carrying fresh loaves raises an eyebrow. He politely slows down, at least until she walks away. Music drifts into the hall. Soft notes from a small harp float through the conversations. The musician plays near the hearth where fingers are less likely to stiffen from the cold. The melody does not demand attention. Instead, it settles gently into the background, blending with quiet voices, the scrape of wooden spoons and the crackle of burning logs. For a few minutes, the castle feels almost cozy. Almost. A door opens. A gust of icy air rushes inside. Half the room instinctively turns toward the warmth of the fire. Winter politely reminds everyone that it has not gone anywhere. You smile despite yourself. The cold has remarkable timing. As the meal continues, scraps of bread find another purpose. Nothing is casually discarded. Some leftovers will feed dogs. Others become ingredients for future meals. Waste has little place inside a household that must survive until spring. Researchers examining medieval household expenses often remark on the careful management of food supplies. Every loaf represented labour from planting grain to milling flour to baking in enormous ovens. Each bite carried months of work behind it. Toward the end of the meal, servants begin clearing bowls with practiced efficiency. The transformation happens almost magically. Empty trenchers disappear, tables are wiped, fresh rushes are scattered where needed. Within a surprisingly short time, the hall begins shifting back toward its many other roles. Meetings will soon take place, visitors may arrive, children might receive lessons, life flows forward without hesitation. You linger beside the fire for one final moment. The warmth reaches your face. Your hands finally feel comfortable again. Then another smell catches your attention. Roasting meat, fresh herbs, baking bread. It comes not from the hall, but from somewhere deeper within the castle. The kitchens themselves. Curiosity proves impossible to resist. You rise from the bench and follow the lively sounds of chopping, stirring, and cheerful shouting toward the busiest place in the entire fortress, where dozens of cooks work beside roaring fires to keep every stomach inside these frozen walls satisfied. The closer you move toward the kitchens, the warmer the air becomes. It is not the gentle warmth of a quiet fireplace. It is lively, busy warmth that carries the smell of baking bread, roasting meat, simmering herbs, and burning oak, after spending so much of the day walking through chilly corridors. It feels as though you have stepped into another season entirely. Before you even reach the doorway, you hear it. Knives striking wooden boards, pots rattling against hooks, ladles stirring thick stews, someone calling for more onions, another voice asking where the fresh flour has gone. The kitchen has its own language, spoken through movement as much as words. You step inside. The room seems enormous. Several fireplaces line one wall, each large enough to stand inside if you are feeling particularly adventurous. Flames roar beneath hanging cauldrons, while iron spits slowly turn above glowing beds of coals. Smoke rises steadily into broad chimneys. Though enough lingers below to remind everyone that cooking in the 13th century is not a spotless occupation, your eyes need a moment to adjust, not because of darkness, because everything is moving. A boy no older than 12 rushes past carrying an armful of split wood. Two women knead dough on a long wooden table dusted generously with flour. A cook carefully tastes a bubbling pot before adding another handful of chopped herbs without measuring a single leaf. Nobody pauses. Every pair of hands has a purpose. The castle may appear calm from the outside, yet meals for hundreds of people begin here with an astonishing amount of organization. Household records from noble estates reveal that kitchens often employed an entire network of specialists. Bakers, brewers, butchers, scullions, pastry cooks, pantry keepers, and countless assistants work together, each responsible for a small part of an enormous daily operation. Looking around, that suddenly makes perfect sense. If one person stopped working, several others would immediately notice. You drift toward the nearest hearth where a broad iron pot hangs from a chain. Inside, vegetables tumble lazily through rich broth. Steam curls upward, carrying the scent of leeks, cabbage, parsley, and barley. It smells wonderfully comforting. The cook notices your curiosity. Without saying much, he offers you a wooden spoon. You taste the broth. It is hearty rather than delicate, simple rather than fancy, exactly the sort of meal that helps someone forget, if only briefly, that snow is piling up outside. He smiles with quiet satisfaction before returning to his work. Good food requires no long speeches. Across the room, another team prepares bread. Large rounds of dough rest beneath linen cloths, while they rise near the warmth of the ovens. One baker gently presses a finger into the surface of a loaf before nodding with approval. Soon, each loaf disappears into the great oven using a wooden peel nearly as tall as the baker himself. The oven radiates fierce heat. Standing beside it for more than a minute becomes surprisingly uncomfortable. You almost laugh. 5 minutes ago you wished every room felt warmer. Now you are quietly stepping backward in search of cooler air. Balance, it seems, remains difficult to achieve. Nearby hangs an impressive collection of cooking tools. Iron hooks, long forks, heavy knives, wooden paddles, stone mortars for crushing spices. Nothing appears decorative. Every object bears scratches, stains, and polished handles from years of steady use. The tools themselves tell stories of thousands of meals. A young apprentice struggles to carry a sack of onions across the floor. It slips from his hands. Onions scatter everywhere. For one glorious moment, the entire kitchen pauses. Then several cooks begin laughing. The apprentice sighs dramatically before chasing runaway onions beneath tables. Even in a medieval castle, vegetables occasionally make a bid for freedom. You suspect this story will follow him for quite some time. One fascinating custom involved tasting certain dishes before they reached the Lord's table. In some households, this reflected concerns about poison, while in others it simply ensured the meal met expected standards. Exactly how often either reason came into play depended greatly upon the household itself. Fortunately, today's stew appears to threaten no one except perhaps anyone hoping to keep perfectly clean sleeves. The floor deserves careful attention. Fresh rushes cover some areas. Elsewhere the stone remains damp from spilled water and melted snow carried in on boots. You walk cautiously. One careless step could send you sliding into a basket of turnips. History remembers kings. It rarely remembers embarrassing kitchen accidents. Another room branches away from the main cooking area. Inside, shelves stretch from floor to ceiling. Ceramic jars stand beside sacks of flour and bins filled with dried peas. Bundles of garlic hang from wooden beams. Strings of onions sway gently whenever someone brushes past. Everything has its place. Nothing is left scattered. The pantry keeper moves methodically between shelves. Recording supplies with remarkable concentration, he knows exactly how much grain remains. He notices when another barrel of salted fish is opened. He calculates how long current stores might last if winter continues longer than expected. His work is almost invisible. Yet without it the kitchen would descend into confusion within days. Written inventories from medieval households often list food in astonishing detail. Grain, beans, cheese, honey, vinegar, spices, and salted meats all appear carefully counted because every item represented security against uncertain months ahead. Outside, snow continues falling. Inside, every handful of flour matters. Near another hearth, a woman prepares herbs using a smooth stone mortar. She crushes sage, then thyme, then dried mint. The fragrance changes with every motion. Suddenly the smoky kitchen fills with bright, fresh aromas that seem almost impossible during the depths of winter. You close your eyes for a moment. The herbs carry faint memories of warmer seasons, fields, gardens, sunlight, a reminder that spring still exists somewhere beyond the frozen landscape. Children growing up in castle households sometimes heard that dropping salt into the fire by accident invited quarrels before the next sunrise. Whether anyone truly believed this warning or simply disliked wasting precious salt remains impossible to know. Either explanation sounds entirely reasonable. Salt is valuable. Arguments are exhausting. Best to avoid both if possible. As the afternoon continues, trays of freshly baked bread emerge from the ovens. Golden crusts crackle softly while cooling. Steam escapes through tiny splits across the tops. The smell alone would convince almost anyone that life is improving. Even the kitchen dogs appear suddenly alert. Their hopeful expressions suggest years of experience. Perhaps this loaf will fall. Perhaps that cook will drop a crust. Hope, after all, costs nothing. The head cook notices one particularly determined dog inching closer to a basket. Without even turning around, he points silently toward the doorway. The dog sighs in the unmistakable manner of someone who has lost this argument many times before. It wanders away with impressive dignity. You linger a little longer, watching organized chaos unfold around you. Meals do not simply appear upon the tables upstairs. They begin here through sweat, smoke, patience, skill, and countless ordinary tasks performed well. Soon another challenge awaits the household. Preparing enough food is only half the struggle. Keeping those precious supplies safe until winter finally loosens its grip proves just as important. And the castle storerooms hold more secrets than you might imagine. Leaving the warmth of the kitchens feels almost like stepping outdoors again. The air cools noticeably as you follow a narrow passage lit by only a few flickering candles. The lively chatter of cooks fades behind you, replaced by quieter sounds, somewhere ahead. A door closes with a heavy thump. Boots scrape softly across stone. A mouse darts into a crack in the wall and vanishes before you can look twice. The castle storerooms are not designed to impress visitors. They are designed to outlast winter. A thick wooden door swings open, and you step into a chamber where the smell changes completely. Gone are the rich aromas of roasting meat and fresh bread. Here you find the earthy scent of grain, dried herbs, old timber, cool stone, and barrels that have stood undisturbed for weeks. Rows of sacks rise nearly to your shoulder. Barrels stand in careful lines. Wooden chests fill every available corner. At first glance it seems almost untidy. After a few moments you notice the order hiding beneath the surface. Every container has its place. Every shelf has a purpose. The keeper of the stores walks slowly between the rows with a small wax tablet in his hand. From time to time he scratches another note before moving to the next barrel. He notices everything. A sack that has settled lower than yesterday. A broken cord around a bundle of onions. A lid that is not sitting quite flat. Nothing escapes his attention. The success of the entire household quietly depends upon people like him. Castle records from the early 13th century often devoted remarkable attention to food stores. Grain, beans, oats, cheese, salted fish, ale, wine, and firewood were counted with impressive care because shortages could become dangerous long before winter came to an end. Standing here, you begin to understand why. These rooms contain time. Every sack of grain represents another few days. Every barrel of salted meat represents another week. Every wheel of cheese quietly promises that tomorrow's meal can still happen. You walk toward a towering stack of grain sacks. The rough fabric scratches lightly against your fingertips. One has been opened. The steward reaches inside, scoops out a handful of wheat, and lets it fall slowly back into the sack. He watches carefully, checking for moisture, checking for insects, checking for anything that might spoil an entire supply. Grain is patient, so are mold and mice. Neither should be underestimated. Several cats wander confidently through the storeroom. Unlike the kitchen dogs, they receive no instructions to leave. Quite the opposite. Their presence is encouraged. One grey cat stretches lazily before disappearing beneath a shelf where faint scratching noises can be heard. A moment later, everything becomes wonderfully quiet. The cat appears rather pleased with itself. You suspect it has earned today's dinner. A few steps farther along, you reach rows of wooden barrels. Some contain ale, others hold salted pork or beef. Several are filled with dried peas. One releases the sharp, briny scent of preserved herring as soon as its lid is lifted. The smell is memorable. You politely step backward. Food preservation demanded creativity long before refrigeration existed. Salting, drying, smoking, pickling, and storing produce in cool cellars allowed households to stretch the harvest through the harshest months. Without those methods, castles would have faced impossible shortages before spring. It is easy to admire a feast. It is harder to appreciate the months of preparation that make it possible. You continue deeper into the storage rooms. Bundles of herbs hang ups and down from ceiling beams. Sage, rosemary, thyme, mint. Their leaves have dried slowly over many weeks, preserving both flavour and fragrance, when one bundle is gently crushed between careful fingers. This scent bursts into the cool air with surprising strength. For an instant you forget the snow outside. It smells like midsummer. Nearby stand baskets filled with onions and garlic. They are simple vegetables, yet astonishingly dependable. Many survive winter remarkably well when kept cool and dry. Carrots rest in boxes of sand. Turnips occupy another corner. Apples fill shallow wooden crates. Each fruit carefully arranged so bruising remains minimal. No one simply tosses food into storage. Everything receives attention. Everything earns its place. You notice one servant turning apples one by one. Curious. You ask why. He explains that spoiled fruit spreads trouble quickly. One rotten apple really can encourage others to follow. Some sayings become famous because they happen to be true. The castle cannot afford carelessness. An old winter saying passed through some medieval households claim that counting your barrels aloud after sunset tempted bad fortune into the cellar. The wiser course, according to the tale, was to finish inventory before darkness settled completely. Perhaps that sounded comforting. Perhaps it simply encouraged people to finish their work before candlelight made mistakes more likely. Either explanation feels perfectly sensible. Another chamber contains something especially precious. Spices, not large quantities, just a few carefully sealed containers. Pepper, cinnamon, cloves, ginger. Their fragrances remain powerful despite the tiny amount stored inside. These precious seasonings have travelled astonishing distances before reaching this castle, across deserts, along rivers, through busy ports, across dangerous seas, finally into this quiet storeroom where they wait patiently for special occasions. Holding even a small pouch reminds you how connected medieval Europe already was to distant trade routes. Luxury sometimes arrives in surprisingly small packages. You notice that the spice chest remains locked whenever no one is using it. An understandable precaution. Its contents may be worth more than many ordinary workers could earn in months. Farther along stands the cheese room. Large wheels rest upon wooden shelves, slowly aging in the cool air. The smell greets you before the doorway does. Strong, earthy, persistent. One servant laughs as you wrinkle your nose. He assures you that the finest cheeses often smell the fiercest. You're not entirely convinced. Then again, People centuries from now will make similar arguments. Some debates never truly end. The steward pauses beside a nearly empty barrel. He studies it silently before making another mark on his tablet. No dramatic speeches, no visible worry, just another quiet calculation. If supplies continue disappearing at their current pace, another barrel must soon be opened. Every decision echoes weeks into the future. The evidence that survives from medieval estates suggests experienced officials constantly balance generosity with caution. A feast could strengthen loyalty among guests, yet unnecessary extravagance during winter might leave the household struggling before the first green shoots appeared in spring. Planning was its own form of protection. You leave the storeroom carrying a deeper respect for ordinary things: beans, barley, salt, dried herbs. None seem particularly exciting on their own. Together they keep an entire castle alive. As you return toward the corridors, workers pass carrying baskets filled with provisions bound for the kitchens. Others arrive with empty containers waiting to be filled again. The quiet rhythm never stops. Food moves constantly through the castle like blood through a living body. Every journey begins here. Every meal depends upon these cool, carefully managed rooms. Yet storing supplies is only part of the story. Tomorrow, before the sun climbs very high, you will discover the people whose unseen labour carries every barrel, cleans every passage, hauls every bucket, and somehow keeps this frozen fortress running from dawn until long after darkness has settled once again. Morning has fully settled over the castle by the time you step back into the main courtyard. The snow has stopped for now, leaving the rooftops wrapped in a clean white blanket. Sunlight catches the frost along the walls, making the stone shimmer for a few precious moments before another cloud drifts across the sky. The beauty lasts only a heartbeat. Someone is already sweeping snow away from the entrance. Another servant carries 2 heavy buckets across the yard. A stable hand pushes open the barn doors while a flock of impatient geese loudly announces that breakfast should have arrived much earlier. The castle never really wakes up. It simply changes from one task to the next. If the lord is the face of the household, the servants are its hands. There are dozens of them, perhaps well over 100 in a large residence. Many visitors notice the banners, towers, and impressive walls. Far fewer notice the people quietly making all of it function. You decide to follow them. The first person you meet is a young page carrying a bundle of letters tucked safely beneath his cloak. He cannot be much older than 13, yet he moves through the corridors with remarkable confidence. He knows every staircase, every shortcut, every room, without pausing. He delivers a message to one chamber before hurrying toward another. His day has barely begun. Many boys entered noble households at a young age to learn manners, discipline, riding, and practical responsibilities. Serving as a page was both education and work, with every ordinary duty preparing them for greater responsibilities later in life. You suspect he could find his way through this castle with his eyes closed. You certainly could not. Turning another corner, you nearly collide with 2 women carrying baskets of freshly washed linen. They smile politely before continuing on their way. The cloth smells faintly of cold air and wood smoke. Laundry during winter demands remarkable patience. Water must first be carried, then heated. Clothes are scrubbed, rinsed, wrung out. Finally, they must dry without freezing into stiff shapes. Even after all that effort, heavy wool garments often need days before every trace of dampness disappears. You suddenly feel grateful for electric clothes dryers. One woman pauses beside a line of shirts hanging near a warm passage. She checks each one with experienced fingers, still damp, not ready. Back they stay. There is no point rushing nature. Nearby, another servant kneels on the floor, replacing fresh rushes beneath one section of the hall. The old layer has become flattened after weeks of footsteps. Out it comes. Fresh bundles go down. The work appears simple until you realise how much floor there is. The castle contains room after room after room. Replacing rushes could easily occupy an entire day. People often imagine medieval floors as permanently filthy. Yet many households worked surprisingly hard to keep important spaces reasonably clean. Sweeping, changing rushes, removing waste, and maintaining fireplaces formed part of ordinary daily life. Even if cleanliness looked rather different from modern expectations, you continue into one of the side passages. A porter struggles past carrying a barrel balanced carefully upon a wooden frame. The load looks impossibly heavy. His boots slide slightly on the worn stones, but he quickly regains his footing. He's likely made this journey hundreds of times. Strength comes through repetition. So does balance. You offer to help. He grins, then politely refuses. Apparently you still look like someone who might accidentally drop the barrel. Fair enough. The sound of hammering draws you toward another workshop. Inside, 2 men repair a damaged cartwheel while an apprentice gathers wood shavings from the floor. Nothing dramatic has happened. No battle, no storm, just ordinary wear. Even peaceful castles require constant repairs. Doors loosen, buckets leak, benches wobble, roofs lose shingles. The building itself never stops asking for attention. One carpenter gently runs his hand along a rough plank before reaching for his tools. He does not measure with complicated instruments. Years of experience guide his movements. The board fits neatly into place. Sometimes skill looks effortless, because you never witness the decades behind it. Further along the passage you meet one of the castle's oldest servants. His hair has turned silver, his hands are broad and scarred. He carries a ring holding more keys than you thought possible. Each key opens a different door, a storeroom, a cellar, a pantry, a locked chest. He smiles knowingly when he notices your fascination. The keys jingle softly with every step. Somehow they sound reassuring. A household this large depends upon trust as much as strength. You begin noticing small kindnesses. One servant quietly helps another lift a heavy basket. A cook slips an extra piece of bread into a stable boy's hand. A laundress laughs while showing a younger worker how to mend a torn sleeve more neatly. These moments pass quickly. No speeches, no applause, just ordinary generosity. It reminds you that surviving winter is easier when people help each other. A story shared in several regions claimed that thanking the household broom before the year's first snowfall would bring good fortune to everyone living under the roof. Whether anyone actually spoke to their broom is impossible to know, but traditions like this reveal how even everyday tools could gather small layers of meaning over time. You briefly imagine introducing yourself to a broom. Perhaps it would appreciate the recognition. By midday the stable yard grows especially busy. You wander inside. Warm air greets you almost immediately, not because of fireplaces, because of horses. Their body heat fills the building with a gentle warmth quite different from the dry heat of burning wood. Several grooms brush thick winter coats, while another checks each animal's hooves. Fresh straw is spread across the floor. Buckets are filled, harnesses inspected. The horses depend entirely upon these workers. One neglected task could become tomorrow's problem. The smell inside is unmistakable. Hay, leather, warm animals, a little mud. Quite a lot of manure, oddly enough. After everything you have experienced over the past few days, it no longer seems unpleasant. It simply smells like life continuing, outside again. A pair of young servants chip ice away from stone steps using iron tools. The work is slow. Every strike sends tiny fragments skittering across the courtyard. Safer steps mean fewer injuries. No one wants to explain that an important visitor slipped because someone skipped morning chores. Castle life is built upon preventing little disasters before they happen. The afternoon gradually settles into its familiar rhythm. Buckets move, doors open, logs disappear into hearths. Ashes leave fireplaces, fresh water arrives, waste leaves the walls. Meals appear almost as if by magic. Except now you know the truth. There is no magic, only people. Hundreds of ordinary people performing ordinary tasks with extraordinary consistency. Their names rarely appear in grand chronicles. Kings sign treaties, knights fight battles. Yet without these workers, neither kings nor knights could remain inside the castle for very long. As daylight begins its slow descent toward evening, you lean against the wall near the courtyard and watch servants crossing from one duty to another. Each person carries something: firewood, water, tools, bread, clean linen, messages. The castle breathes through their footsteps. Soon your path will lead away from these busy workers and toward the quieter chambers above, where the Lord and his family enjoy comforts unavailable to most people here. Even there, however, winter refuses to show much respect for wealth, and you're about to discover that noble life inside a frozen castle is far less comfortable than the stories often suggest. The steady rhythm of footsteps grows quieter as you leave the bustling lower halls behind. Fewer servants hurry through these upper passages. The air carries less of the rich smell of cooking and more of beeswax candles, polished wood, and the faint perfume of dried herbs tucked into wall hangings. Even here, where the Lord and his family spend much of their time, winter follows close behind. You climb another narrow staircase. The stone beneath your boots has been worn smooth by generations of careful feet. A small window lets in a ribbon of pale daylight that barely reaches the opposite wall. Outside, the courtyard appears peaceful from this height. Tiny figures cross the snow carrying baskets, firewood, and bundles wrapped tightly against the cold. Distance has a curious effect. The work below almost looks effortless. You already know better. At the top of the stairs, a heavy oak door opens into the Lord's private chamber. The room is certainly finer than the spaces you have visited before. A large bed stands beneath a carved wooden canopy. Thick curtains surround it on all sides, creating a smaller space where warmth can gather during the night. Brightly coloured tapestries cover much of the stone wall, their woven scenes showing hunters, forests, and flowering vines that seem almost impossible to imagine while snow covers the countryside outside. A broad fireplace burns steadily nearby. The flames are generous, not extravagant. Even the wealthiest family cannot waste fuel simply because they can. You move closer to the hearth and immediately notice the difference. The room still feels cool. It simply feels less determined to freeze you. The Lord's chamber enjoys advantages unavailable elsewhere. Its position higher within the castle provides greater privacy. Fewer people pass through. More attention is given to keeping the fire alive. Valuable furnishings soften echoes and reduce some of the drafts that linger in less important rooms. Comfort exists here. Complete comfort does not. A servant quietly adds another log to the fire before checking several candles that have burned low. Every movement is careful. Nothing is hurried. The room itself encourages a slower pace. A sturdy chest rests near the bed. Its iron fittings gleam softly in the firelight. Inside are garments, important documents, treasured objects, and perhaps a few possessions carrying memories that no inventory could ever describe. Locks matter here, not because everyone expects thieves around every corner, but because valuable things deserve protection. You notice a table standing beside one window, wax tablets, sheets of parchment, a feather quill, an inkhorn. The Lord cannot simply send a message with the touch of a screen. Every letter requires time, careful handwriting, and often a trusted messenger willing to brave uncertain roads. Documents from noble households reveal just how much written correspondence filled everyday life. Land disputes, marriages, rents, supplies, legal matters, and personal requests all travelled slowly across the kingdom by horseback, sometimes taking days or even weeks to reach their destination. Waiting becomes part of communication. You wonder how many modern worries might disappear if replies routinely took 2 weeks. Perhaps not all of them, but certainly some. The chamber contains another feature that immediately catches your attention. A wooden chair with carved arms. Compared with the long benches downstairs, it almost resembles a throne. Almost. Comfort in the 13th century remains wonderfully relative. You sit carefully. The seat is firm, exceptionally firm. Your back silently begins missing modern cushions within seconds. Luxury, it seems, still believes in excellent posture. Near the fireplace hangs a polished bronze basin. A servant pours warmed water from a pitcher. Steam rises gently into the room. The opportunity to wash with warm water during winter feels remarkably pleasant. Not extravagant, simply pleasant. Hands recover first. Then your face. The lingering chill slowly loosens its grip. Cleanliness mattered more than many popular stories suggest. Wealthier households often made considerable efforts to provide water for washing, even if bathing habits differed greatly from modern expectations as depended upon season, custom, and circumstance. The process requires effort. Water must be carried, heated, transported upstairs. Nothing arrives effortlessly. Your eyes wander toward the window. Unlike the narrow openings elsewhere in the castle, this one contains small pieces of glass held together by strips of lead. The view remains slightly uneven through the tiny panes, yet it feels almost luxurious compared with wooden shutters alone. Sunlight filters through with surprising softness. Glass this fine remains uncommon. Its presence quietly announces both wealth and status. Outside, snow begins drifting down once more. Large flakes tumble lazily through the still air. The castle seems almost peaceful from here. Smoke curls upward from chimneys. The walls stretch confidently across the hillside. Beyond them lies a world of frozen roads and sleeping fields. Inside, life continues. An elderly steward enters carrying a folded blanket trimmed with soft fur. He spreads it across the foot of the bed before carefully smoothing every crease. Nothing about his work appears dramatic, yet every thoughtful detail makes the room slightly more welcoming. Years of service have taught him that small comforts matter during long winters. Among the household there is an old saying that a neatly made bed invites restful dreams, while an untidy one encourages restless thoughts to wander all night. Whether anyone believed this literally hardly mattered. Making the bed properly each morning left the chamber orderly and ready for another cold evening. Some traditions survive simply because they make life feel better, others because they quietly encourage good habits. Perhaps this one managed both. Your attention shifts toward the tapestries once again. Their colours glow warmly beside the fire. Scenes of green forests, hunting dogs, flowering trees, and bright summer skies almost seem like windows into another season. Looking at them during January must have carried its own quiet comfort, a reminder that winter never lasts forever. Some specialists believe such wall hangings noticeably reduce the chill radiating from stone surfaces, while others think their practical effect has been exaggerated over time. The truth probably depended upon the thickness of the fabric, the design of the room, and perhaps even the expectations of the people living there. Either way, the chamber feels gentler because they are present. A servant brings a small tray, dried apples, walnuts, a wedge of hard cheese, nothing lavish. Just enough for a light refreshment. The apples have softened slightly during storage, yet their sweetness remains. For one brief moment you taste autumn lingering beneath the snow. The afternoon light begins fading surprisingly early. Candles are trimmed. Fresh logs settle into the fireplace with a burst of sparks. Outside the glass, the falling snow grows thicker. Inside the chamber, conversation remains quiet. Letters are read. Accounts are checked. Plans for tomorrow take shape. Power often looks dramatic in paintings. In reality, much of it consists of reading reports, making decisions, and hoping everyone remembers the instructions. You glance around the room one final time. Yes, this chamber offers more comfort than the servants' quarters below. The bed is finer, the fire larger, the furnishings richer, yet the stone walls remain cold. The windows still rattle faintly in the wind. Winter continues pressing patiently against every side of the castle, reminding noble and servant alike that nature recognizes very few social ranks. As evening approaches, another part of the household quietly begins its own important work. Beyond these private chambers, women oversee stores, men clothing, care for children, and manage countless daily responsibilities that hold castle life together with a steadiness few visitors ever notice. As you leave the Lord's chamber behind, the atmosphere changes once again. The corridors remain quiet, but the silence feels different here. Instead of official business and private meetings, these rooms are filled with the softer sounds of everyday life. You hear gentle conversation drifting through half-open doors. Somewhere, a spindle hums as it twists wool into thread. A child laughs for only a moment before being reminded that indoor voices are preferable inside echoing stone walls. The work taking place here rarely appears in grand paintings, yet without it, the castle would struggle to function for even a few days. You step into a spacious chamber where several women sit close to a cheerful fire. Baskets overflow with wool in shades of cream, grey, and brown. Folded cloth rests neatly on one table while bundles of thread occupy another. No one seems idle. One woman carefully embroiders the edge of a linen cloth using surprisingly tiny stitches. Another repairs a cloak whose elbows have worn thin after years of use. A younger girl winds fresh thread onto wooden spools with patient concentration. The room feels peaceful, busy, comfortable in its own quiet way. The smell of warm wool mingles with beeswax candles and dried lavender hanging from a beam overhead. The scent is delicate, not strong enough to overpower the smoky air, just enough to brighten it. In many noble households, women supervise large parts of domestic management. They oversaw stores, distributed textiles, organized servants, planned meals alongside kitchen officials, and helped ensure that supplies lasted through the changing seasons. Their responsibilities extended far beyond embroidery. despite what many romantic paintings might suggest. You begin to notice that nearly every task connects to another. A repaired cloak means someone stays warmer. Extra thread means another garment can be mended. Fresh linen means cleaner bedding. Nothing exists in isolation. Everything supports something else. One noble woman studies a wax tablet while quietly discussing the remaining stores of cloth with an older servant. The conversation is calm, practical, no dramatic speeches, just careful planning. She asks how much undyed wool remains, whether enough linen has been finished before spring, how many blankets still require repair. Every answer influences tomorrow's decisions. Managing a castle often resembles solving a puzzle whose pieces never stop moving. Nearby sits a cradle carved from smooth oak. A baby sleeps peacefully beneath several soft blankets. Every so often a nurse gently rocks the cradle with one foot while continuing her sewing. The movement becomes almost hypnotic. Back and forth, back and forth. The child never wakes. Watching her, you wonder how many lullabies have echoed through these walls over the centuries. Songs disappear once they are sung. Yet perhaps some melody survives simply because each generation teaches them to the next. A little boy wanders into the room carrying a small wooden horse. Its wheels are uneven. Its paint has long since faded. To him, however, it is magnificent. He pushes it proudly across the floor before stopping beside the fire to warm his hands. Childhood looks surprisingly familiar. The toys change. The centuries change. Children remain wonderfully recognizable. An old fireside saying tells children that dropping a spindle onto the floor invites mischievous elves to tangle every thread before morning. Whether anyone truly feared invisible knot-makers is difficult to say, but the story certainly encouraged careful handling of valuable tools. The little boy listens with wide eyes. He immediately places the nearest spindle back on the table, just to be safe. The women exchange quiet smiles. A servant arrives carrying a basket filled with dried herbs, collected during warmer months. The contents are sorted with remarkable care. Chamomile, mint, sage, rosemary. Each bundle finds its proper place. Some will flavour meals. Others may scent linen stored in wooden chests. A few could become simple household remedies when someone develops a cough or complains of aching joints after long hours in the cold. The castle prepares for small troubles long before they appear. A narrow window admits pale afternoon light. One woman moves her embroidery closer to it without interrupting her work. Good daylight is precious during winter. Candles are useful. Sunlight costs nothing. As the clouds shift outside, the light brightens briefly before fading once again. She adjusts her chair almost without thinking. Years of experience have taught her exactly how to follow the day's changing light. In one corner stands an impressive chest bound with iron. Inside lie folded garments reserved for special occasions, rich fabrics, fine veils, carefully embroidered sleeves. Each piece is wrapped in linen to protect it from dust. Opening the chest releases the pleasant fragrance of dried herbs tucked among the clothing. The scent feels unexpectedly fresh, even after months of storage. You notice that every item is folded with remarkable precision. Order itself becomes a kind of protection. Scattered clothing wrinkles. Carefully stored clothing lasts. Letters exchanged between noble families sometimes mention gifts of fine cloth, embroidered garments, or beautifully worked textiles with almost the same excitement that another household might reserve for jewellery. Creating quality fabric required enormous amounts of labour, making every finished piece deeply valuable. The afternoon passes gently. Conversation drifts from practical matters to family news. Someone wonders whether a relative has safely reached another estate before the heavy snowfall. Another hopes spring markets will bring fresh dye for new cloth. A third quietly recalls a particularly harsh winter from many years earlier, when snow remained well into April. Memories travel easily beside a warm fire. One elderly woman chuckles as she recalls how a goose once wandered into the weaving room and refused to leave until bribed with cabbage leaves. Everyone laughs. Apparently the goose believed it had developed a sudden interest in textile production. The story grows slightly more dramatic with every telling. That, too, seems timeless. You move toward another chamber where two girls practice reading from a beautifully written manuscript. Their tutor points patiently to each line. The girls repeat the words carefully. Education within noble households varied widely depending on family circumstances, but reading, religious instruction, household management, music, and languages could all form part of the young noblewoman's upbringing. The room grows quieter as concentration settles over everyone. Only the soft crackle of burning logs breaks the silence. You realize these private chambers shelter more than warmth. They preserve knowledge, skills, traditions, stories, lessons passed gently from one generation to another. Outside the window, snow begins falling again. The flakes drift so slowly that they almost appear suspended in the evening air. Inside, another blanket is finished, another garment repaired, another child comforted. None of these achievements will appear in royal chronicles, yet each one helps the household endure another winter day. As candles are trimmed for the coming evening, someone quietly gathers baskets of finished sewing while another servant prepares to carry folded linens to sleeping chambers throughout the castle. The day's work is nearing its end. Tomorrow it will begin again, much the same, steady, patient, essential. Soon your path will lead downstairs once more, where a very different group of castle residents waits for the evening meal. They have 4 legs, feathers, wagging tails, curious noses, and just as much reason to hope the winter passes quickly. The gentle voices behind you fade as you descend the familiar stone staircase. The air changes almost immediately. The comforting fragrance of lavender and clean linen gives way to something much earthier. You catch the smell of hay, leather, damp straw, and warm animals long before you reach the courtyard. The castle's 4-legged residents are beginning another evening of their own. They may not attend meetings or keep household accounts, but they are every bit as important to life within these walls. A groom waves as you approach the stables. He has a brush tucked beneath one arm and a handful of oats in his pocket. His boots are covered with straw. His sleeves carry the unmistakable marks of someone who has spent the entire day working with horses. The stable itself feels surprisingly welcoming, not because it is especially tidy, not because it is luxurious, because it is warm. The body heat of dozens of horses has transformed the building into one of the most comfortable places in the castle. Steam rises gently from their backs as they chew hay with slow, patient movements. The soft sound fills the stable. Crunch, pause, crunch again. It is oddly relaxing. A chestnut mare lifts her head as you pass. She studies you for a moment before deciding you are unlikely to produce another handful of oats. Your popularity drops rather quickly. The groom chuckles. You'll make better friends if you bring apples next time. That seems like sensible advice. Horses were among the most valuable possessions a noble household could own. They carried messengers across difficult roads, transported supplies, served in hunting parties, and, when necessary, accompanied knights into battle. Keeping them healthy through winter demanded constant attention. You watch as one groom carefully checks each hoof. Another runs his hands along a horse's legs, searching for cuts or swelling. A third spreads fresh straw across the floor. The work is calm, methodical. No movement is wasted. These animals cannot simply explain when something feels wrong. The people caring for them learn to notice the smallest changes. Outside the stable doors, snow begins falling once more, only lightly this time. Tiny flakes drift lazily through the fading daylight. Inside, the horses barely seem to notice. They have seen many winters before. One young colt grows curious about your cloak. His nose nudges the fabric hopefully. You scratch behind its ears. It seems satisfied with the arrangement, for now. Nearby hangs a collection of saddles, bridles, harnesses, and riding gear. Every strap has been cleaned, every buckle inspected. Leather stiffens quickly if neglected during cold weather. A stable boy rubs oil into one saddle with careful, circular motions. He works slowly. There is no point rushing craftsmanship. Well-maintained equipment lasts longer. That simple truth echoes throughout the castle. From the stables you continue toward another building where hunting dogs are kept. The sound reaches you first. A few eager barks, several excited tails thumping against wooden walls. Then silence returns almost as quickly as it arrived. The kennel master steps outside carrying a bucket. Immediately every dog becomes convinced that dinner has finally appeared. Hope springs eternal. Even among hounds, these dogs are impressive animals, broad chests, strong legs, bright, intelligent eyes. Some rest quietly upon fresh straw, while others watch every movement with polite curiosity. A few younger dogs seem convinced that every visitor exists purely to provide attention. You kneel beside one particularly friendly hound. Within seconds, your hand is enthusiastically accepted as a scratching service. The arrangement appears entirely one-sided. You do not mind. Castle records occasionally mention carefully bred hunting dogs alongside horses and falcons, showing just how highly such animals were valued. Good hounds represented years of breeding, training, and patient care. The kennel master whistles softly. Every dog immediately looks toward him. That kind of discipline is earned over countless ordinary days, not dramatic moments, just repetition. You leave the kennels and follow a narrow path toward the dovecote. The round stone tower stands quietly against the evening sky. Inside, hundreds of pigeons shuffle gently upon wooden ledges. Soft cooing echoes through the enclosed space. The sound feels almost dreamlike after the noisier stable yard. Pigeons provided more than pleasant background music. They supplied eggs, meat, and valuable droppings that could be used as fertilizer. Even the smallest residents contributed to the household in practical ways. Nothing inside a medieval castle escaped usefulness for very long as twilight deepens. You visit the small pens where chickens scratch determinedly through scattered straw. A proud rooster struts across the yard with the confidence of someone entirely unaware of his modest size. Several hens ignore him completely. Probably a wise decision. Fresh eggs become scarcer during the darkest months, making everyone especially welcome in the kitchens. The poultry keeper checks each nesting place with practiced hands before securing the coop for the night. Foxes remain hungry regardless of the season. Better not to tempt them. Among stable workers there is an old belief that whistling loudly after sunset encourages restless horses to remain awake all night. Whether this idea began as simple superstition or as a clever way of keeping noisy apprentices quiet has long since been forgotten. Either way, No one seems eager to test it. The evening grows colder. You pull your cloak tighter as you continue toward a small shelter beside the inner wall. A pair of goats watches your arrival with unmistakable suspicion. One decides to nibble thoughtfully at a hanging rope. The other appears to judge every decision you have ever made. Goats possess remarkable confidence. You have to respect it. Near the goat pen stands a modest pig enclosure. The pigs have buried themselves deep beneath fresh bedding, emerging only when they hear footsteps approaching. Food remains one of life's strongest motivations. That appears true across all species. You notice several servants carrying buckets filled with kitchen scraps. Nothing edible goes to waste. Vegetable peelings, bits of stale bread, leftover porridge. Everything suitable finds another purpose. One worker laughs as the pigs hurry forward with surprising speed. Apparently they never lose their enthusiasm. The fading light paints the snow in shades of blue and silver. Smoke rises lazily from the castle chimneys. The animals settle gradually into their evening routines. Horses continue chewing hay. Dogs curl into warm circles upon fresh straw. Chickens grow quiet. The pigeons murmur softly overhead. Watching them all, you begin to appreciate another layer of castle life. People are not surviving winter alone. They depend upon animals for transport, food, protection, companionship, and daily labour. In return, the animals depend entirely upon human care. It is a partnership shaped by necessity as much as affection. As you make your way back toward the main buildings, the first stars begin appearing above the towers. The cold sharpens noticeably. Candles glow warmly behind narrow windows. The sound of the evening bell carries gently across the courtyard. Soon the household will gather once more, this time not for work but for prayer, reflection, and the quiet rituals that help people face another long winter night with steady hearts. By the time the evening bell finishes echoing across the courtyard, the entire castle seems to slow its pace. The hurried footsteps that filled the passages only an hour ago become quieter. Doors close more gently. Conversations soften until they blend into the distant crackle of fireplaces and the steady whisper of the winter wind outside. You follow a small stream of people toward the chapel. No one rushes. There is comfort in arriving together. The chapel occupies a modest corner of the castle, yet it possesses a quiet dignity that makes it feel larger than it truly is. Candlelight flickers against pale stone walls, casting warm pools of gold that dance across carved wooden beams. The smell of beeswax mingles with incense lingering from an earlier service. It is perhaps the sweetest fragrance you've encountered since arriving. Someone has placed evergreen branches near the altar. Their fresh scent gently pushes back the smoky smell that follows nearly every room inside the castle. You pause for a moment before entering. Outside, snowflakes drift silently through the darkening sky. Inside, warmth comes less from the small fire than from the gathering of familiar faces. A stable hand kneels beside a cook. A noblewoman stands only a few steps away from a young page. The steward bows his head beside a carpenter whose hands still carry traces of sawdust. For a little while, titles seem less important. Everyone faces the same altar. The priest steps forward wearing heavy robes whose embroidered edges catch the candlelight. His voice is calm and measured, rising gently through the chapel before settling into the quiet corners above. Much of the service is spoken in Latin. The words are unfamiliar to many ears. The rhythm, however, is deeply familiar. People know when to kneel, they know when to stand. They know when silence itself becomes part of the prayer. By the early 13th century, The church shaped nearly every stage of daily life across much of medieval Europe. Birth, marriage, harvests, legal promises, feast days, mourning, and ordinary Sundays all unfolded within a religious calendar that gave the year its familiar rhythm. You glance toward the narrow windows. Night has almost completely arrived. Only the faintest trace of blue remains beyond the glass. Candles now provide nearly all the light. Their flames move gently whenever someone shifts position. The shadows seem alive, not frightening, simply peaceful. For several minutes. No one speaks except the priest. The stillness feels unusual after the busy kitchens and crowded storerooms. It gives your thoughts room to wander. You think about the servants carrying water before dawn, the cooks tending fires throughout the day, the grooms brushing horses in the fading light. Every person you've met shares something in common. None of them know exactly what tomorrow will bring. Perhaps another snowfall, perhaps a traveller at the gate, perhaps news carried by horseback, perhaps nothing unusual at all. Uncertainty has a way of making familiar rituals feel reassuring. Near the front of the chapel hangs a painted image of a saint. The colours have softened with age, yet the expression remains gentle. A child studies the painting with complete concentration. His mother quietly whispers the saint's name before smoothing the hood around his shoulders. Lessons begin early here, not only reading and writing, also memory, tradition, belonging. A soft cough echoes somewhere behind you. Another candle is replaced before its flame can disappear. The small acts continue without drawing attention. One elderly woman quietly adjusts the cloak around her husband's shoulders. He nods without looking away from the altar. Some kindnesses need no words. Among the castle folk there is a story often shared during the longest winter evenings. It tells of a traveller caught in a blizzard who followed the distant sound of chapel bells until he found shelter just before the storm became deadly. Whether the tale grew from an actual event or simply offered comfort during harsh winters, no one seems particularly interested in proving it. The story survives because it reminds people that hope sometimes arrives as quietly as a familiar sound carried through the darkness. You find yourself listening differently after hearing it. Even the bell that called everyone together now seems warmer somehow. The priest begins another prayer. Heads bow once more. Outside, the wind brushes softly against the walls. The castle has heard that sound for generations. Kings have come and gone. Children have grown into parents. Old servants have trained younger ones. Still the winter wind continues its patient conversation with the stone. Your eyes drift toward the wooden roof overhead. The beams disappear into shadow before emerging again where candlelight reaches them. No one alive remembers the day those timbers were first lifted into place. They simply exist, strong, dependable, part of the castle's memory. The written sources tell us much about ceremonies and official practices, yet they reveal far less about what individual worshippers carried in their hearts. One person may have entered the chapel seeking courage, another may have come out of gratitude, a third may simply have welcomed a peaceful place to sit after an exhausting day. The records cannot always distinguish between outward habit and inward feeling. Perhaps they were all true at once. The service gradually comes to an end. No one leaps immediately to their feet. There is a brief pause, a shared silence, almost as though everyone wishes to carry a little of the calm back into the evening. Then movement begins again. The noble family leaves first. Others follow at an unhurried pace. A young page carefully extinguishes several candles while leaving enough light for those still praying quietly in the corners. You remain a little longer. The chapel grows emptier with each passing minute. its silence changes, not lonely, simply restful. Eventually you step outside. The cold greets you instantly. The sky above the castle is cleared. Thousands of stars shine with remarkable sharpness, their light reflecting faintly across untouched snow. Your breath rises in pale clouds. Somewhere on the walls a guard calls softly to another beginning his watch, far below. A stable door closes. A dog barks once before settling again. The castle prepares itself for another long winter night. Yet winter does not challenge only the spirit. It tests the body as well. A persistent cough in one chamber, an aching joint in another, cold hands that refuse to grow warm. Tomorrow you will discover how people faced sickness, discomfort, and the uncertain remedies available within these frozen walls, relying upon experience, herbs, prayer, and more than a little quiet hope. Morning arrives with the sky the colour of pale ash. The snow has stopped again, leaving the castle wrapped in a silence that seems almost too perfect to disturb. Frost clings to every rooftop. Thin ribbons of smoke rise from the chimneys and drift lazily into the still air before disappearing altogether. You pull your cloak tightly around your shoulders and notice something almost everyone else is doing. Someone is coughing. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the sort of dry cough that follows people through long winters. Another person rubs stiff hands together while crossing the courtyard. A guard rotates one shoulder before lifting his spear. An elderly servant pauses halfway up a staircase to catch his breath. Winter asks a great deal from every body inside these walls. No one escapes entirely. You find yourself following a chamber servant carrying a small basket filled with folded cloth, a clay jar, and several bundles of dried plants tied neatly with string. She disappears into a quiet room where an older woman sits beside the fire with one foot resting on a wooden stool. The servant kneels without fuss. She unwraps the cloths, warms them near the hearth, then gently lays one across the woman's swollen ankle. The older woman closes her eyes. The warmth alone seems to bring relief. No miracle, just comfort. People living in medieval castles relied heavily on practical knowledge passed from one generation to the next. Family experience, local healers, monastery gardens, and handwritten medical texts all contributed to the ways illness and injury were treated, although access to each depended greatly upon wealth and location. The room smells pleasantly of rosemary and sage. Another herb releases a sharper scent you cannot immediately recognize. A small pot simmers quietly above the fire. Steam curls upward, carrying earthy aromas that seem both medicinal and comforting at the same time. The servant pours the warm liquid into a wooden cup. The older woman drinks slowly, whatever the mixture tastes like. Her expression suggests it is not particularly delightful. Some remedies are appreciated more for hope than flavour. You leave quietly. Illness, even a minor one, invites softer footsteps. Across the corridor, another chamber tells a different story. A little boy sits wrapped in blankets while his mother gently strokes his forehead. He looks tired rather than frightened. Beside the bed rests a bowl of broth untouched except for a few careful spoonfuls. Children recover quickly sometimes. At other times they do not. No parent in any century enjoys waiting to see which path lies ahead. The castle physician arrives carrying a leather satchel. His clothing is modest, his movements are calm. He asks questions before opening the bag. How long has the fever lasted? Has the child eaten? Has he slept? The answers matter, even without modern instruments. Careful observation remains one of the oldest medical skills. Several handwritten medical works circulated through medieval Europe, drawing upon Greek, Roman, Arabic, and local traditions. Treatments varied widely, but attentive watching often mattered just as much as any remedy prepared from herbs or minerals. The physician checks the child's pulse, examines his eyes, feels his forehead. He offers quiet advice before preparing another herbal mixture, whether it helps completely, partly, or simply reassures the worried family is difficult to know. Many recoveries leave no written explanation. Many losses leave no detailed record either. The castle moves on quietly around these private moments. Outside, servants continue hauling water. Bread continues baking. Horses still require feeding. Life cannot pause because someone develops a fever. You continue your walk and discover a woman hanging bunches of herbs from a wooden beam inside a warm room. The bundles sway gently. Chamomile, yarrow, mint, sage. The names roll softly through the air as she identifies each one. She smiles while explaining which herbs soothe a sore throat, which are added to baths, and which simply make a room smell fresher during the long months when windows remain mostly closed. Not every plant claims to cure. Some merely make difficult days a little easier. That seems worthwhile enough. In one corner sits a small stone mortar stained green from years of use. The steady rhythm of grinding fills the room. Press, turn, press again. It is surprisingly soothing to listen to. You almost lose track of time. An elderly servant enters rubbing his hands. His fingers have grown red and cracked after weeks of hauling buckets through icy mornings. The herbal woman opens a small jar containing thick animal fat mixed with fragrant herbs. She gently rubs the mixture across his skin. He sighs with obvious relief. Sometimes healing begins with something wonderfully ordinary. An old saying shared among many households suggested that keeping a sprig of rosemary near the bed encouraged restful sleep during sickness. Whether anyone credited the herb itself or simply found comfort in its familiar fragrance remains impossible to untangle after so many centuries. Either way, the room certainly smells pleasant. You step outside once more. The cold feels sharper after spending time near warm fires. Your nose immediately reminds you of the temperature. Across the yard, two boys laugh while carefully avoiding a patch of ice. One slips anyway. Fortunately, his pride appears far more injured than anything else. His friend helps him stand before both continue on their way. Even small accidents deserve attention during winter. A twisted ankle can keep someone from working. A fall on frozen stone can become far more serious than anyone intended. You pass the smithy where heat pours from the doorway. The blacksmith's face shines with sweat despite the season. The contrast makes you smile. Outside, you cannot feel your fingertips. Inside, someone wishes for cooler air. Life enjoys these little contradictions. Later in the afternoon, you visit a small chamber where several older servants rest briefly after completing their work. One quietly massages an aching shoulder. Another stretches stiff knees before standing again. Years of lifting, carrying, chopping, and climbing leave their marks long before old age officially arrives. The body remembers every winter. Modern readers sometimes imagine illness in medieval times as a constant state of catastrophe. The picture was far more varied. Many ailments resembled familiar complaints that people still experience today: colds, sore joints, tired muscles, upset stomachs, and lingering coughs formed part of ordinary life, especially during cold seasons. Of course, serious sickness also existed. That uncertainty lingered quietly in the background. It encouraged people to value healthy days whenever they arrived, as evening approaches. The physician crosses the courtyard once again, carrying his satchel beneath one arm. Another patient awaits, perhaps someone with aching teeth, perhaps an injured hand, perhaps nothing more than another stubborn cough. His work is never entirely finished, neither is the castle's. The fires burn steadily. The kitchens prepare supper. Children begin recovering from the day's adventures. Workers return tools to their proper places. Slowly, the household gathers itself for another evening within the shelter of thick stone walls. Soon the mood will grow lighter. The work of the day will give way to stories, songs, games, laughter, and the quiet entertainments that help people forget, if only for a few hours, the endless winter waiting patiently beyond the castle gates. By the time supper comes to an end, darkness has wrapped itself completely around the castle. The last traces of daylight disappeared hours ago, leaving only the warm glow of fireplaces and hundreds of dancing candle flames to push back the night. Outside, the snow reflects just enough starlight to outline the towers. Inside, another world comes alive. The day's hardest work is finally over. Buckets have been carried, animals have been fed, the ovens have cooled a little. The fires have been replenished. For the first time since dawn, many people can simply sit. You return to the great hall. It feels different now. Earlier it echoed with practical conversations and the clatter of wooden bowls. Now the room hums with softer voices. Benches have shifted closer to the fire. Several children curl beneath wool blankets while older servants stretch tired legs toward the glowing hearth. No one seems eager to leave. The hall offers company. Company makes winter feel shorter. A young musician settles onto a stool near the fireplace. He adjusts the strings of a small harp with practiced fingers. One by one, the notes become clearer until the instrument seems satisfied with itself. Then he begins to play. The melody flows gently through the room. Nothing hurried, nothing grand. Just quiet music rising and falling like slow breathing. Conversation continues without interruption. The music simply becomes part of the evening. Castle households often included musicians, especially those belonging to wealthy noble families. Some lived with the household permanently, while others travelled from one estate to another, bringing songs, stories, and news gathered along the roads. The tune ends. A second begins almost immediately. Someone nearby starts humming along. You suspect this is a favourite. Across the hall an older man leans forward, resting his elbows upon his knees. The firelight flickers across his weathered face. Without any announcement, he begins telling a story. The children notice first, then several adults. Gradually more listeners turn toward him. His voice never grows loud. It does not need to. Good storytellers understand that quiet words often travel farther than shouted ones. Tonight's tale concerns a knight who loses his way in a deep forest during the heart of winter. The knight encounters strange travellers, a lonely bridge, a talking raven that insists it knows the safest road home. Whether the raven actually speaks or the knight has simply spent too many freezing days alone is left delightfully uncertain. The children stare with wide eyes. One little girl quietly grips her blanket each time the story grows mysterious. Even several adults smile. Perhaps they have heard the tale dozens of times. Some stories improve with repetition. Others become comfortable simply because everyone already knows how they end. You find yourself relaxing more deeply than at any point since arriving. The crackle of burning logs blends with gentle laughter. Warm light dances across the walls, outside. The wind scratches softly against the shutters, unable to join the gathering. A pair of women nearby continue spinning wool while listening. Their hands never stop moving. Thread winds steadily onto the spindle. Work and leisure quietly share the same evening. Many ordinary tasks fit naturally beside conversation. A man carefully repairs the leather strap of a saddle. Another sharpens a small knife using slow, patient strokes. One elderly servant peels walnuts into a wooden bowl for everyone to share. Rest does not always mean doing nothing. Sometimes it simply means choosing gentler work. You notice a wooden board resting on one of the tables. Small carved playing pieces are arranged across it. Two men sit opposite each other, studying the position with complete seriousness. Neither speaks. One finally reaches forward, moves a piece, leans back. The other immediately begins thinking. Board games were popular in medieval households, especially during long winter evenings when darkness arrived early. Chess had spread widely across Europe by this period. Those simpler games also entertained people of every social rank, watching them. You realize competition requires remarkably little equipment, only time, patience, and perhaps the ability to pretend you intended that move all along. One player smiles quietly, the other sighs. Apparently the game is not unfolding according to plan near the fireplace. Several children begin tossing small carved knuckle bones across a cloth laid upon the floor. They cheer whenever someone makes a particularly difficult throw. One boy celebrates so enthusiastically that he nearly falls backward into his sister. She rolls her eyes with the weary patience usually reserved for younger brothers. Some family traditions appear wonderfully timeless. Across the room a noblewoman opens an illuminated manuscript. The painted pages shimmer softly beneath candlelight. She reads aloud while several listeners gather nearby. The story speaks of distant kingdoms, faithful friends, dangerous journeys, and unlikely victories. Words have a remarkable way of making cold evenings feel smaller. A servant quietly trims another candle. Fresh wax catches the flame. The room brightens almost without anyone noticing. Among the younger servants there is a favourite fireside tale, claiming that if the flames suddenly burn blue, an unexpected guest will arrive before sunrise. Every now and then someone glances into the hearth with exaggerated seriousness, hoping to spot the mysterious colour. No one seems disappointed when the fire remains perfectly ordinary. Unexpected visitors in winter often bring as much trouble as excitement. You wander toward one corner where several older women sit together sewing. Their conversation drifts from grandchildren to weather, then somehow arrives at geese before returning to weather again. No one appears concerned about staying on topic. The evening belongs to wandering conversations. One woman suddenly begins laughing. She remembers a winter many years earlier when an ambitious goat somehow climbed the castle stairs and wandered into the great hall during supper. The image alone makes everyone nearby smile. The details become increasingly dramatic with each retelling. By the end of the story, the goat is apparently frightened a visiting knight, stolen a cabbage, and nearly joined the musicians. Memory has a generous imagination. The fire burns lower, fresh logs are added. Shadows shift gently across the beams overhead. The longer you remain in the hall, the easier it becomes to understand why these evenings matter. Entertainment here is not merely a pleasant distraction. It strengthens friendships, passes along stories, teaches children, eases tired minds, helps the long winter feel just a little shorter. Beyond the walls, snow continues covering the countryside. Roads disappear beneath fresh drifts. Travellers search for shelter. Forests grow silent beneath the weight of ice. Inside the castle, however, Voices continue rising and falling beside the fire. The warmth belongs not only to the hearth, it belongs to the people gathered around it. Eventually the evening grows late. Children begin yawning. The musicians set their instruments aside. Games come to quiet conclusions. One by one. Candles are extinguished until only the largest fire still glows across the hall. Tomorrow will demand another full day of work. Yet the castle cannot entirely forget the dangers waiting beyond its comforting walls. Winter roads remain uncertain. Supplies grow thinner with every passing week. Watchmen continue pacing the battlements through the freezing darkness, knowing that even the calmest night can change before dawn. Long after most of the castle has settled into uneasy sleep, another day quietly begins for the watch. You climb the winding staircase leading toward the battlements. The steps feel colder than they did yesterday. Thin layer of frost has formed where damp boots tracked in melted snow before the temperature dropped again during the night. At the top, the wind greets you without ceremony. It slips beneath your cloak. It finds your sleeves. It stings your cheeks until they grow numb. The guards posted along the walls do not seem surprised. They simply pull their hoods a little lower and continue walking their familiar route. Back and forth, back and forth. Their boots leave fresh prints across the thin blanket of snow covering the wall walk. Below lies a countryside wrapped in darkness. The fields have disappeared beneath white drifts. Woodlands stand like black islands against the pale ground. Only a handful of distant lights reveal where scattered villages still cling to life through another bitter winter night. One guard pauses beside the parapet. He listens, not because he has heard something unusual, because listening itself is part of the duty. The winter countryside carries sound in unexpected ways. A barking dog from a distant farm, the creak of a cart several fields away, the crack of the ice somewhere along the frozen stream. Every noise deserves a moment's attention before being dismissed. The castle cannot afford careless assumptions. A messenger might arrive after dark. A traveller could become lost in the snow. Someone seeking shelter might call from beyond the gate. Or perhaps the wind is simply playing one of its familiar tricks. You rest your hands upon the cold stone. Almost immediately you regret it. The wall has stored the night's chill with remarkable determination. You tuck your hands safely back inside your sleeves. Below, the gatehouse remains closed. Its heavy doors look almost immovable beneath the moonlight. Chains hang quietly. Iron fittings catch the faint glow of torches burning above the entrance. Everything appears peaceful. Peace, however, requires attention. The routine never stops. One guard walks while another stands still, studying the road leading toward the nearest village. Every so often they exchange a few quiet words before continuing their patrol. Nobody wastes energy on unnecessary conversation. Breath itself feels valuable in weather like this. Castles were designed to provide security during uncertain times, but their strength depended as much upon disciplined routines as thick walls. Gates were inspected, watches changed, stores checked, and signals maintained with dependable regularity because neglect often caused greater trouble than any enemy. The hours pass slowly. The stars wheel overhead with patient certainty. The moon climbs a little higher before beginning its slow descent toward the western hills. Cold has a curious way of stretching time. A single hour feels unexpectedly long. From somewhere below comes the muffled sound of a horse stamping inside the stable. Moments later another answers, then silence settles once more. The animals sense the weather changing before anyone else seems to notice. One of the older guards glances toward the sky. More snow tomorrow, he murmurs. No one questions him. Years spent outdoors have taught him to read clouds as comfortably as other people read letters. Whether he is correct remains to be seen. His companions seem willing to trust experience. Eventually the watch changes. Fresh guards climb the stairs carrying small lanterns whose flames sway gently in the wind. Those finishing their shift descend carefully, shoulders stiff after hours in the freezing air. One rubs warmth back into his fingers. Another smiles with quiet satisfaction at the thought of a waiting fire. No celebration, simply relief. You follow them down into the gatehouse. The difference in temperature feels almost miraculous. The room remains cool, yet after standing atop the walls it seems wonderfully comfortable. A small fire burns inside a stone hearth. Several guards gather around it without speaking very much. One warms a mug of ale. Another removes a glove long enough to inspect a reddened fingertip before pulling it back on. Their faces glow softly in the firelight, tired, alert, content to rest while someone else now watches the walls. Nearby hangs a rack filled with spears, shields, and bows. Each weapon rests neatly in its place. Bowstrings receive careful attention during damp weather. Leather straps are checked regularly. Arrow shafts remain bundled together, ready should they ever be needed. No one hopes to use them. Preparation is quieter than battle. Fortunately, it's also much more common. Outside the gatehouse, fresh hoofprints cross the snow. A rider arrived shortly before midnight. His horse now rests in the stable, while the traveller sleeps inside the guest quarters. News often moved more slowly during winter because frozen roads, swollen rivers, and deep snow turned ordinary journeys into exhausting expeditions. A trip that seemed straightforward in summer could require considerably more patience once the cold settled across the countryside. You imagine riding through this weather for days. The thought alone makes your shoulders feel heavier. The messenger's cloak hangs near the fire, drying gradually. Snow still melts from its hem. Beside it rest sturdy boots caked with frozen mud gathered from roads stretching far beyond the castle. Some journeys leave visible memories. Morning remains several hours away. The kitchen staff has already begun stirring. A faint glow appears beneath one doorway as someone prepares the first fire of the day. Routine quietly defeats darkness, little by little, one task after another. Among the stable workers there is a habit of touching the great gate's wooden frame before leaving on a winter journey. Nobody explains the gesture. Some say it promises a safe return. Others insist it simply became custom, because countless hands performed the same movement over generations, whatever its beginning. Even the youngest groom does it without thinking before leading a horse beyond the walls. The castle itself seems to approve of familiar rituals. They connect today's footsteps with those that echoed here decades earlier. As the eastern horizon slowly lightens, shapes begin returning to the landscape. Trees emerge first, then fences, then the frozen road winding toward the distant hills. Another day has arrived. The danger everyone feared during the night never appeared. No alarm bells rang. No desperate knocking echoed through the gate. Sometimes the greatest victory is an uneventful dawn. The guards know this better than anyone. They stretch tired muscles before yielding their places to the next watch. Behind them the castle begins waking once more. Smoke rises from additional chimneys. The first servants cross the courtyard carrying buckets. Somewhere a rooster announces the sunrise with complete confidence, regardless of whether anyone asked for his opinion. Winter still surrounds the castle. The snow remains deep. The stores continue shrinking, one careful meal at a time, yet something subtle has changed. The daylight lingers just a little longer than it did when you first arrived. It is hardly noticeable unless you have lived through every frozen morning. Still, those extra moments of light carry quiet promise. Soon the household will begin sensing that the hardest weeks are finally slipping behind them, and with that gentle change the castle itself will seem to breathe a little easier. When you first crossed the bridge into the castle, winter felt endless. The wind seemed determined to stay forever. The snow covered every familiar path. The trees stood silent beneath coats of white. Each morning looked much like the one before it. Now, after so many days within these walls, you begin to notice the sort of changes that only reveal themselves to patient eyes. The dawn arrives a little sooner. The evening lingers a little longer. A single drop of water falls from the edge of a roof and disappears into the snow below, then another. No one celebrates such tiny things. Not yet. But everyone notices. You step into the courtyard before the household is fully awakened. The air still bites at your cheeks, though it lacks the fierce sharpness of the coldest weeks. Your breath hangs before you in pale clouds, drifting upward until it vanishes into the clear morning sky. The castle stretches quietly around you. Stone towers stand exactly where they always have. The gatehouse remains watchful. Smoke curls steadily from the chimneys. Nothing appears different, and yet everything is. A pair of sparrows lands on the top of the stable roof. One hops sideways, the other flutters after it. Their cheerful chatter lasts only a few moments before they disappear again. Someone nearby smiles without even realizing it. Birdsong has been absent for so long that hearing it feels almost like greeting an old friend. The stable doors swing open. The horses step into the crisp morning air one by one. Their coats have grown thick through the winter months, and they seem eager to stretch their legs after another night indoors. A groom pats the neck of the oldest mare before leading her toward a patch of ground where the snow has begun thinning. She lowers her head hopefully. Grass has not yet returned. Still, she keeps looking. Hope is persistent. In another corner of the courtyard, two children crouch beside a shallow puddle where yesterday there had only been solid ice. One carefully pokes the water with a stick. The other watches with complete fascination, as though witnessing a great scientific discovery. Perhaps, in its own small way, it is. The smallest changes often announce the largest seasons. No trumpet declares that winter is ending. It simply loosens its grip little by little. Castle accounts from different regions often show that late winter demanded careful judgment. Supplies had to last until fresh crops and grazing returned, even when warmer days appeared. Experienced stewards resisted the temptation to assume hardship had already passed. Patience remained as valuable as optimism inside the kitchens. The mood has shifted almost imperceptibly. The cooks still measure grain carefully. The bread remains modest. Nothing is wasted. Yet conversation carries a lighter tone than before. Someone jokes that the onions have survived the winter better than most people. A helper laughs while slicing another basketful. Even vegetables deserve a little admiration after enduring months in a dark cellar. You wander into the herb garden enclosed within the castle walls. Most of it still sleeps beneath damp earth. Bare branches reach quietly toward the pale sky. At first glance there seems to be nothing to see. Then you notice a few stubborn green shoots pushing through the soil beside the stone path. Small, delicate, entirely unimpressed by the cold around them, they simply continue growing. A gardener kneels nearby. He brushes away dead leaves with gentle hands. No grand speeches, no dramatic gestures. Only quiet work preparing for the season that everyone hopes is coming, The rhythm feels familiar. Throughout the winter, you've watched people perform hundreds of ordinary tasks: sweeping floors, mending clothing, carrying water, feeding animals, stacking firewood, offering comfort, saying prayers. Those countless small efforts have carried the household safely through the harshest weeks. Survival rarely depends upon one heroic act. More often, it rests upon thousands of unnoticed ones. A woman opens a window for a few precious minutes before closing it again. Fresh air fills the chamber. The room feels brighter immediately, somewhere overhead. Laundry flutters gently from a sheltered line. Not long ago it would have frozen stiff within minutes. Today it simply sways in the breeze, near the chapel. An elderly servant pauses to warm himself in a patch of sunlight falling across the stone wall. He closes his eyes, tilts his face upward, says nothing. No words are necessary. The sun has finally become something to enjoy rather than merely endure. Among the stories shared during the long winter evenings was one that promised the first swallow of spring carried good fortune beneath its wings. Children watched the skies eagerly, each hoping to be the first to spot the returning bird. Whether anyone truly believed luck arrived that way mattered less than the happiness the search itself inspired. You find yourself glancing upward as well, not because you expect magic, simply because looking has become part of the season. There's another change too. The sounds inside the castle have become more varied. Doors stand open a little longer. Workers spend more time outdoors. The ringing of the blacksmith's hammer carries farther through the clear air. Dogs chase one another across patches of melting snow. Someone begins repairing a cart that has rested untouched since the deepest cold arrived. Life stretches outward again. Historians cannot always pinpoint exactly when medieval people felt winter had ended. Climate varied from year to year, and every region greeted spring at its own pace. For those living inside castles like this one, the season probably arrived not on a single memorable day, but through a growing collection of ordinary signs that gradually became impossible to ignore. You think back to your first evening here, the unfamiliar corridors, the roaring fire, the heavy wooden gates closing behind you, the endless wind. At the time, the castle seemed built entirely from stone. Now it feels built from people, from the cook who remembered every loaf, the groom who knew each horse by touch, the seamstress whose careful stitches kept families warm, the guard who walked the walls through the darkest nights, the child who laughed anyway, the old storyteller who made winter seem shorter with every tale. Stone protected the castle. People gave it life. You take one last slow walk across the courtyard. The afternoon sun rests upon the towers. Water trickles beneath the bridge. Somewhere beyond the walls, fields wait patiently for another growing season. The castle will continue long after this day. Other winters will come. Other children will grow up within these walls. Other travellers will pass through the gate seeking shelter from cold winds. The seasons will keep turning, just as they always have. For now, though, your own journey draws gently to its close. The fire burns steadily behind the windows. The bell marks another peaceful hour. Snow still lingers in shaded corners, but its reign is ending. You leave the castle knowing that its greatest strength was never simply its walls or towers. It was the quiet determination of the people who filled those rooms with work, kindness, laughter, faith, and hope until spring finally found them again. And with that comforting thought, you let the image of the castle grow softer in your mind. The towers fade into the evening light. The voices become distant. The last curls of chimney smoke drift peacefully into the brightening sky. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing left to carry. only the quiet satisfaction of having made it through another winter, one calm step at a time. For a few more moments, allow yourself to remain here. The castle grows quieter with every passing breath, one by one. The candles are extinguished until only a handful continue to glow behind thick stone walls. Their light flickers gently across wooden beams that have watched countless winters come and go. Somewhere in the distance, a final door closes. A horse shifts comfortably in its stall. A sleepy dog sighs before settling more deeply into the straw. Even the wind seems content to soften its voice as it drifts around the towers. Soon the courtyard will belong only to moonlight and fresh snow. Tomorrow the household will wake before dawn and begin the familiar rhythm all over again. Fires will be lit, bread will be baked, buckets will be carried, children will laugh, stories will be told. Another ordinary day will quietly become another piece of history. Long after the people you have met are gone, the castle itself will remain, standing patiently through changing seasons, waiting for future generations to wonder what life was truly like behind its walls. Tonight, at least, you have shared a little of that life. You have walked the corridors, warmed your hands beside the hearth, listened to the chapel bells, watched the guards on the walls, and waited with everyone else for the first gentle signs of spring. Thank you for spending this peaceful journey with me. If you enjoyed wandering through this frozen medieval world, I hope you'll join me again for another quiet adventure into the past. Until then, have a wonderfully restful evening. Take care of yourself, stay warm wherever you are, and may your dreams be calm, peaceful, and filled with gentle stories from history. Sleep well,